In the ancient emerald valleys of Ireland, where mist clings to the hills like soft wool and the lakes mirror the endless sky, there lived a quiet magic older than memory itself. The land breathed with gentle enchantment, and the waters held secrets whispered by the wind. If you're settling in right now, perhaps with evening shadows gathering around you, this is the perfect moment to let these old whispers carry you somewhere peaceful. And if you find comfort here, a gentle subscription helps these stories reach others seeking the same rest. Tonight, we follow one of those ancient whispers, a story of transformation that becomes, in the end, a story of peace. And so, our story begins. This quiet legend from the misty shores of Ireland tells of finding grace after long wandering, of how the hardest journeys sometimes lead to the softest landings. The old storytellers would speak of the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, who knew the language of water and wind, and they told of children who learned to rest upon the world's gentle currents. Tonight, we follow Fionnuala, whose name meant white shoulder, as she drifts across the silvered waters of Lake Deravara under a milk-pale moon. The lake stretched wide and peaceful beneath the night sky, its surface smooth as polished glass. Fionnuala glided across these waters as a swan, her feathers pure white and luminous in the moonlight, each one holding a soft glow like captured starlight. She had worn this swan form for many turnings of the seasons now, and somewhere along the endless days and nights she had stopped counting. The water beneath her was cool and kind, holding her weight with effortless tenderness. She remembered in the dreamy way of half-forgotten things that she had once walked on land with human feet. But that memory felt distant now, like something belonging to someone else. A story she had heard long ago by a fireside. What felt real was this, the gentle lap of water against her breast, the way moonlight painted silver paths across the lake, the soft sounds of night settling around her like a blanket. The shore nearby was lined with ancient willows whose long branches trailed in the water, creating curtains of green that swayed with each breath of wind. Fionnuala drifted toward them, letting the current guide her. The willows whispered as she passed, their leaves making sounds like rain on still water. Everything here spoke in gentle voices. The reeds that rustled, the small fish that made rings on the surface, the frogs singing their deep, rhythmic songs from the muddy shallows. She tucked her head beneath her wing, feeling the downy softness there, the warmth of her own feathers against her face. This was how she rested now, rocked by the water, held by the lake as tenderly as any cradle. The night air smelled of sweet grass and wild herbs growing along the shore, of clean water and green growing things. Sometimes she caught the scent of heather drifting down from the hills, purple and honey-sweet. Other swans shared these waters with her, wild ones who had always known this form, who had been born to it naturally. They accepted her presence without question, these gentle cousins of hers. In the morning, they would glide together in quiet formation, necks curved gracefully, moving through patches of golden light that broke through the mist. They taught her, without words, the art of perfect stillness, how to float so completely at rest that even the water barely noticed you were there. Tonight the moon was nearly full, and its light turned the entire lake into liquid silver. Fionnuala opened her eyes and watched this transformation, mesmerized by the way each tiny ripple caught and held the glow. The water seemed alive with soft light, as if the moon had melted into it, as if she floated upon a lake of gentle stars. Far across the water, she could see the dark outline of the opposite shore, where more willow trees grew, their shapes soft and blurred in the darkness. Beyond that, the land rose into gentle hills, and beyond those hills, mountains stood watch, ancient and patient, their peaks lost in night clouds. The whole world felt wrapped in quietness, as if it too were settling down to rest. A light breeze moved across the lake, barely strong enough to disturb the surface, just enough to carry the coolness of night air. Fionnuala turned to face it, letting it ruffle her feathers, feeling it flow through the soft down near her skin. The sensation was pleasant, like being stroked by invisible, caring hands. She had learned to love these small touches. Wind, water, moonlight, the way they reached her through her feathers, the way they never demanded anything, only offered their gentle presence. Small sounds drifted across the water. Somewhere a nightbird called, its voice lonely but not sad, just part of the conversation the darkness held with itself. An owl asked its ancient question from the hills, and after a pause, another answered. The frogs maintained their steady chorus, a sound so constant it became like silence itself, something you only noticed when it stopped. Fionnuala began to glide slowly across the lake, her webbed feet paddling beneath the surface with easy, economical movements. The water parted around her breast like silk, smooth and cool, offering no resistance. She moved without destination, simply following the feeling of movement itself, the pleasure of gliding through moonlit water with the night breathing around her. She passed through a patch of water lilies, their broad leaves creating dark islands on the silver surface, their white flowers closed now for the night, but still visible as pale shapes, ghostly and beautiful. The lilies made their own small world here, a floating garden where dragonflies would come in the daytime, their wings catching the light like stained glass. Now they slept, folded away somewhere among the stems and leaves. The water grew shallower here, and Fionnuala could see down to the bottom, where smooth stones lay scattered like thoughts, rounded by countless years of water flowing over them. Small fish darted between the stones, quicksilver flashes that appeared and vanished in heartbeats. Water plants grew in gentle green waves, swaying with the current, creating an underwater meadow that moved in slow, hypnotic rhythms. She let herself drift into even shallower water until her feet touched the soft mud of the bottom. It was warm from the day's sun, silky and yielding beneath her webbed toes. She stood there in the shallows, the water reaching just to her breast, and felt the mud anchor her gently to the earth. Above her, the sky spread vast and filled with stars that burned with cold, distant fire. She had watched these stars for countless nights, had learned their slow, wheeling patterns, the way they marked the passing of seasons. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light, as if the sky held its own lake where celestial swans might glide. Fionnuala had never felt small beneath this vastness. Instead, she felt held by it, embraced by the same darkness that cradled the stars, the same night that wrapped around the whole world with equal gentleness. There was something comforting in being one small white swan on one small lake beneath this endless sky. It meant she was part of something larger, something that held her without asking anything in return. A fish jumped nearby, breaking the surface with a soft splash, sending rings spreading outward in perfect circles. Fionnuala watched these circles expand and overlap, creating patterns of intersecting waves that caught the moonlight, a geometry of light and water that lasted only moments before smoothing away into stillness again. Everything here was temporary. Everything flowed and changed and became something else, and yet everything also remained. The lake was always the lake, the moon always returned, the night always came with its gift of rest. She moved back into deeper water, letting it lift her again, reclaim her weight. The sensation of floating was one she never tired of. This perfect balance between surrender and support, the way the water asked nothing of her except that she allow herself to be held. She spread her wings slightly, feeling the air move through her flight feathers, each one a perfect instrument designed for catching wind and transforming it into lift. Even here on the water, her wings remembered the sky. Sometimes she did fly, rising from the lake at dawn when mist still clung to the surface, her wings beating in strong rhythmic strokes that carried her up into the pale morning air. She would circle the lake, seeing it whole, seeing the patterns the wind made on its surface, the shapes of the shoreline, the way the land folded into hills and valleys. From above, she could see how the water held the reflection of the entire sky, making the lake into a mirror between two worlds. But night was for floating, for surrendering to the water's embrace, for letting the darkness settle around her like a protective cloak. Fionnuala found a spot where the water was deep enough to hold her, but calm enough to barely move, a place of perfect stillness. She arranged herself for sleep, tucking one leg up into the warmth of her belly feathers, settling her head once more beneath her wing, letting her body relax completely into the water's care. The lake held her without effort, its surface tensioned like a hand beneath her, gentle and sure. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, matching itself to the slower rhythms around her. The patient breathing of the night, the ancient pulse of the earth itself. Her eyes grew heavy, though she kept them open just slightly, watching the play of moonlight through her feathers, seeing it fracture into tiny prismatic gleams where the light caught. Water droplets clinging to the down. Around her, the night continued its quiet work. The wind moved through the reeds with a sound like distant conversation. The frogs sang, the willows swayed. Somewhere far off, water flowing into the lake from a small stream made its own small music, a trickling, bubbling sound that spoke of mountains and rain. And the long journey water makes from sky to earth to lake to sky again. Everything was moving in cycles. Everything was returning and departing and returning again. And she was part of this eternal circulation, this endless gentle flowing. The moon climbed higher, smaller now, more distant, but still bright enough to cast shadows. Fionnuala's shadow on the water was soft-edged and wavering, a dark swan shape that moved beneath her like a companion, like another version of herself made of absence and depth. She watched it lazily, seeing how it stretched and compressed as tiny waves passed under her, how it was never quite still but always there, always attending her. Her brothers were somewhere on this same lake, other swans gliding through other patches of moonlight, finding their own places of rest. She could feel their presence without seeing them, the way you can feel the presence of family even in darkness, even in silence. They had been transformed together, had learned this swan life together, and though they often drifted apart during the long quiet hours, they remained connected by invisible threads of kinship and shared experience. In the beginning, the transformation had felt like loss, the loss of hands that could grasp, of voices that could speak human words, of the ability to walk on land without waddling. But time had softened that feeling, had rounded its sharp edges like water rounds stones, until what remained was simply this, a different way of being, not better or worse, just different. And in this difference, she had found unexpected gifts. The gift of flight, of rising into air and feeling it hold her aloft, of seeing the world from above where borders and divisions disappeared into patterns of light and land and water. The gift of the water's embrace, of floating without effort, of being held without having to ask. The gift of simplicity, of a life organized around basic needs and pleasures, food, rest, the company of others, the beauty of each passing moment. She had learned patience here on the lake, had learned to wait without restlessness, to let time pass without counting it, to be present in each moment without always reaching for the next. The swans who were born to this form had taught her this simply by example, by the way they could stand motionless in the shallows for hours, watching for fish, or float without purpose, content simply to be afloat, to be alive, to be themselves in this one eternal now that was all any moment ever was. The water beneath her cooled slightly as the night deepened. Fionnuala stood, shifted her position just enough to keep comfortable, resettled into stillness. The coolness was pleasant against her belly and breast, a gentle reminder that she was alive, that she could feel, that she was real and present, and here. Sometimes she needed these small reminders because the peace of floating could become so complete that she seemed to dissolve into it, to become indistinguishable from the water and the moonlight and the night itself. But she didn't dissolve. She remained herself, Fionuala, the swan with white feathers that glowed in moonlight, the eldest of the swan children, the one who had learned first how to stop grieving for what was lost and start accepting what was given. She remained herself, and yet she also knew now that herself was larger than she had once believed, that she extended outward into the water and the night, that she was made of the same light as the moon, the same silence as the sleeping earth. A memory rose in her mind, gentle and unbidden, a memory of music. Once, before the transformation, there had been music in the great hall where she had lived. Harps and voices, rhythms and melodies that seemed to shape the very air into something tangible, something that touched you like hands even though it had no substance. She remembered dancing to that music, her human feet moving in patterns learned long ago, her body responding to the pull of rhythm and melody. And she realized, floating here in the moonlight, that the music had never really stopped. It had only changed its form. The water made music against the shore. The wind made music in the reeds. The frogs sang their deep songs, and the night birds called their lonely melodies, and the fish jumping made percussion on the water's surface. The whole world was music, had always been music, and she was floating on its surface, held by its rhythms, moved by its endless variations on the themes of day and night, life and death, sound and silence. She let this music flow through her, let it carry her deeper into rest. Her breathing slowed further, becoming almost imperceptible, just the slightest rise and fall of her breast beneath her feathers. The water breathed with her, rose and fell in the same rhythm, so that she couldn't tell anymore where her breathing ended and the lake's breathing began. They were breathing together, she and the water, she and the night, she and the entire world wrapped in darkness and moonlight. Time lost its meaning here, in this place of perfect rest. Minutes might have passed, or hours. There was no way to tell and no need to know. The moon moved across the sky in its ancient trek, but so slowly that its movement was invisible unless you looked away and then looked back much later. The stars wheeled overhead in their vast circles, marking out the night's progression with patient precision, but their movement too was too slow to see, too gradual to disturb the sense that time had stopped, that this moment was eternal, that she could float here forever in this perfect peace. Fionuala let her eyes close completely now, surrendering even the beauty of the moonlight, turning inward to a deeper darkness where no light reached but where she felt utterly safe. Behind her closed eyes, she could still sense the silver glow of the moon, could feel it as a gentle pressure on her feathers, a soft warmth that didn't disappear just because she wasn't looking at it anymore. The moon was always there, even when unseen, even when clouds covered it, even in daylight when its light was drowned in the sun's greater fire. It was always there, patient and constant, waxing and waning, but never truly gone. Like the moon, she too was constant beneath her changes, still herself despite wearing feathers instead of skin, still Fionuala even in this transformed shape. The knowing settled into her bones like warmth, like the heat of summer sun stored in stones and released slowly through cool nights. She was still herself. She had always been herself. Nothing could take that away, not even magic, not even time, not even the long years stretching ahead like the lake stretching to distant shores. The water rocked her with infinite gentleness, tiny movements that were barely movements at all, just the breathing of the lake, its chest rising and falling beneath her. She could feel each small wave as it passed under her body, lifting her slightly, then lowering her, a rhythm so subtle and so constant that it became part of her, merged with her heartbeat, her breathing, until she was not separate from the water but an expression of it, a white swan-shaped ripple on its dark surface. Somewhere in the reeds, a moorhen made soft clucking sounds as it settled for the night. The sound was domestic and comforting, reminding Fionnuala of chickens in a farmyard, of ordinary peaceful things. Even here in the wild places, there was domesticity. There was the feeling of home. The reeds were the moorhen's home. The willow branches were home to sleeping birds. The lake itself was home to countless creatures, each one finding its place, its particular spot of safety and rest. And this floating place, this patch of moonlit water surrounded by the breathing night, this was her home now. Not the house with walls and a roof, not the hearth with fire burning, but something larger and more encompassing. A home made of elements, of water and air and light. A home that moved and changed but never abandoned her, never asked her to be anything other than what she was. The breeze picked up slightly, enough to make small waves that lapped against her feathers with gentle insistence, like someone tapping on a door, polite and patient. She didn't mind. She liked the sensation of water moving against her, liked the way it created slight variations in the pressure on her body, tiny differences they kept her aware of. Where her boundaries were, where she ended and the rest of the world began, even as those boundaries grew soft and permeable in her half-sleeping state. A cloud drifted across the moon, thin and translucent, softening its light without blocking it completely. The silver on the water dimmed to pewter, and shadows lost their edges, became suggestions rather than statements. Everything grew even softer, even more dreamlike, as if the world were dissolving into mist, becoming something less solid, more like memory or imagination, or the place between waking and sleep, where impossible things feel natural and right. Fionnuala drifted with the dimmed light, let herself become less distinct, let her edges blur. She was swan and water and moonlight, all mixed together, all part of one continuous flow of existence that had no beginning and no end, that simply was and had always been and would always be. In this state, there was no difference between floating and flying, between water and air, between now and forever. Everything merged into one eternal peaceful moment. The cloud passed and the moonlight strengthened again, clarifying the world, bringing back shadows and reflections, making the water sparkle with renewed brightness. Fionnuala opened her eyes just slightly and watched this transformation, this return to clarity. It felt like waking from a dream, except she wasn't waking. She was drifting deeper, sinking further into rest, and the dream was not ending, but expanding, becoming large enough to hold everything, all the light and all the darkness, all the clarity and all the mystery. She thought about her brothers again, wondered where they were on the lake's vast expanse. Were they sleeping now, heads tucked under wings, surrendered to the night's embrace? Or were they still moving, still gliding through moonlight, still exploring the lake's secret places? It didn't matter. They were safe. She knew this with a certainty that needed no proof. The lake would hold them as it held her. The night would watch over them as it watched over her. They were together even in separation, bound by something deeper than proximity. The water was growing cooler as the night progressed toward its deepest hour, that time when darkness seems most complete, when even the moon's light feels farther away, when the world holds its breath before turning toward dawn. But dawn was still hours away, and those hours stretched out before her like the lake itself, vast and peaceful, full of nothing but rest and quiet and the gentle passage of time that asked nothing, demanded nothing, simply flowed like water, carrying everything along in its current. Fionuala adjusted her position slightly, felt the pull of tired muscles, the pleasant heaviness of a body ready for deep sleep. Her wings felt like they weighed nothing and everything simultaneously, light as air and heavy as stones, both at once. She let them settle more completely against her sides, felt her feathers overlap and interlock, creating a seamless surface that shed water and held warmth, a perfect garment designed by nature for this exact life, this exact way of being. The fish were less active now in the deeper night, most of them resting too in their own ways, hovering in the water or nestled in weedy beds on the lake bottom. The frogs had quieted somewhat, their chorus less insistent, more sporadic, as if they too were growing tired, ready to surrender to sleep. The whole world was settling, winding down, letting go of the day's energies and tensions, releasing everything that was unnecessary, keeping only what mattered: breath, heartbeat, the quiet awareness of being alive. A beaver surfaced nearby, its sleek head breaking the water with barely a sound, whiskers glistening in moonlight. It saw Fionuala and paused, regarding her with small dark eyes that held no fear, only curiosity and recognition. They were both creatures of the water, both at home in this element, both part of the lake's community of living things. The beaver dove again after a moment, its flat tail making a soft slap on the surface, and then it was gone, swimming underwater toward its lodge built among the reeds. Fionnuala felt a wave of affection for the beaver, for all the creatures who shared this lake with her, who made it alive with their presence, who gave it character and meaning. Beyond just being water held by land, they were like a family, these lake dwellers, not related by blood, but by place, by the shared experience of living in and around these waters, of depending on them for life, of knowing their moods and movements, their seasons and secrets. The moon was directly overhead now, at its highest point, looking down on the world with its pale and partial gaze. Fionnuala gazed back at it, meeting that distant light with her own dark eyes, and felt a connection span the vast space between them. The moon pulled the tides in the ocean, moved the waters of the earth, and even here in this inland lake, its influence could be felt in subtle ways, in the behavior of fish, and the height of water, and the mysterious rhythms that governed all living things. She wondered if the moon ever got lonely, so far away, so separate from everything it looked down upon. But no, she decided, the moon was not lonely. It had the stars for company, and it had the earth itself, which it circled in eternal dance, faithful and true. It had purpose and place, and that was enough. Just as she had purpose and place here on this lake, floating in peace, existing simply as herself, a white swan under moonlight, needing nothing more than what this moment offered. The water held memories, she realized. Not human memories with thoughts and images, but something older and deeper. The memory of every raindrop that had fallen into. Every snowflake that had melted on its surface, every river that had fed it, every life that had drunk from it or lived in it or died and returned to it. The lake was made of all these memories, countless and layered, creating a depth that went far beyond the physical distance from surface to bottom. And now she was part of those memories too. Her presence here, night after night, season after season, was being absorbed into the lake's vast consciousness, becoming part of its story, part of what it was. Long after she was gone, the lake would remember the white swan who floated on its surface under full moons, who found peace in its embrace, who learned to let go and trust and rest in its gentle holding. She was writing herself into the water with every moment spent upon it. This thought brought comfort rather than sadness. To be remembered by the lake, to become part of its eternal story, seemed like enough, more than enough. It seemed like everything, actually, to matter to this place, to leave an impression on its ancient consciousness, to give something back to the water that had given her so much. She felt gratitude welling up in her chest, a warmth that spread through her like sun breaking through clouds, and she sent this gratitude out wordlessly, let it flow from her body into the water, a gift, an offering, a thank you for all the holding and healing and peace. The lake received her gratitude as it received everything, without judgment, without comment, simply accepting what was offered and holding it in its depths. This acceptance was perhaps the greatest gift of all, this complete lack of judgment, this willingness to hold everything, sorrow and joy, darkness and light, memory and forgetting, with equal care. The lake did not ask her to be strong or brave or anything other than what she was. It simply held her, kept her safe, let her rest. Fioniwala felt sleep approaching now like a tide, inevitable and gentle, rising through her body from feet to head, softening muscles, slowing thoughts, dimming awareness. She didn't fight it. Fighting would be pointless and exhausting, like trying to swim against a current or paddle against the wind. Instead, she surrendered to it, opened herself to it, invited it in like a welcome guest who had traveled far to reach her. Her breathing grew even slower, each exhale longer than the last, each inhale shallower. The space between breaths lengthened, filled with silence and stillness, became a place unto itself, a place of no thought, no worry, no need. Just pure existence, pure being, pure rest. Her heart continued its patient work, beating steadily, reliably, asking nothing of her conscious mind, simply doing what hearts do, keeping blood flowing, keeping life continuing, requiring no effort or attention. The last thing she was aware of before sleep took her completely was the feeling of water against her breast, cool and silk smooth, and the sound of wind in the willows, and the presence of moonlight on her closed eyelids, and the sense of being held, being safe, being exactly where she belonged. These sensations didn't disappear as she slept, but rather became the substance of her sleep itself, became the backdrop against which her dreams would unfold. Gentle dreams of floating and flying, of water and sky, of peace that had no end. The night deepened around her sleeping form. Hours passed, unmarked and unmeasured. The moon traced its arc across the sky, began its descent toward the western horizon. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. The water held her through all of it, patient and constant, asking nothing, giving everything. The lake breathed and she breathed with it, two parts of one rhythm, one dance, one continuous flow of existence that had no beginning and no end. In her dreams, she flew. Her wings caught the air and lifted her, carried her up and up, until the lake below was just a silver mirror, until the land was a patchwork of greens and browns, until she was level with clouds and could look them in the eye. The air was cold up here, thin and sharp, but her wings were strong and sure, beating with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, that felt as natural as breathing. She flew over mountains and valleys, over forests and rivers, over the whole wide world, and everywhere she went, she saw beauty. The kind of beauty that makes you ache with joy, that fills you so completely there's no room for anything else. But even in the dream, she knew she would return to the lake. No matter how far she flew, no matter what marvel she witnessed, the lake was home, and home was where she would always come back to. The water was waiting for her, patient and faithful, ready to receive her again, to hold her again, to let her rest upon its surface like a blessing, like a prayer, like a promise kept. When dawn finally came, creeping slowly over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose and gold, Fionnuala stirred, but did not wake. The light touched her feathers, turned them luminous, made her glow like a creature made of morning itself. The lake's surface began to steam as the cooler night air met the slightly warmer water, creating mist that rose in ghostly columns, in veils and curtains that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical and strange. Other swans woke and began to move, their calls echoing across the water, announcing the new day. But Fionnuala continued to sleep, held in that space between night and morning, between darkness and light, where rest goes deepest and dreams are most vivid. The lake continued to hold her, and the water continued to rock her gently, and time continued its patient flow, and everything was exactly as it should be, perfect and peaceful and complete. When she finally did wake, it was gradual, a slow rising toward consciousness like a diver ascending from great depths, taking her time, pausing at intervals to adjust. First came awareness of light beyond her closed eyelids, warm and golden. Then awareness of soundbird calls, water lapping, wind rustling. Then awareness of body feathers, wings, the curve of neck, the weight of head. And finally, awareness of place. The lake, the water, the morning, the here and now of existence. She opened her eyes to a world transformed by light. Everything sparkled and shimmered, still wet with dew, still touched by night's moisture, but warmed now by sun's first rays. The mist was lifting, revealing the far shore bit by bit, unveiling willows and reeds and the green hills beyond. The sky was clear and blue, holding the promise of a beautiful day, a day of warmth and plenty, of easy living and simple pleasures. Fionnuala stretched her wings, felt them extend to their full span, felt the air move between her feathers. She shook herself, sent droplets flying in all directions, each one catching the light, becoming for a moment a tiny prism, a fragment of rainbow. Then she folded her wings again, tucked them neatly against her sides, and began to paddle slowly across the lake's glassy surface, leaving behind her a V-shaped wake that spread outward, creating ripples that caught the morning light. She felt rested in a way that went deeper than just physical rest. Her mind was clear and quiet, empty of worry or planning or regret. Her heart felt open and soft, ready to receive whatever the day might bring without resistance or fear. This was the gift of deep sleep, of true rest. It wiped the slate clean, allowed you to begin again, fresh and new, unburdened by yesterday's concerns or tomorrow's anxieties. The day unfolded peacefully. She found food easily, water plants and small creatures abundant in the shallows. She spent time with other swans, gliding together in loose formation, occasionally preening each other's feathers in gestures of affection and grooming. She floated and she flew, alternating between water and air, enjoying each element for its unique gifts and pleasures. She rested in the shade of willows when the sun grew hot, letting their cool green shade wash over her like water. As afternoon softened toward evening, she found herself thinking about the night to come, already anticipating the peaceful hours of floating in moonlight, the gentle rocking of water, the deep rest that waited for her like a lover, faithful and true. This anticipation was itself a kind of joy, a pleasant warmth in her chest, a looking forward that made the present moment richer by contrast. The sun began its descent, painting the western sky in shades of amber and copper and rose. The light changed, grew golden, made everything it touched beautiful. The water, the land, her own white feathers. Shadows lengthened and grew softer. The air cooled slightly, carrying the first hints of evening's approach. The day was completing its circle, returning to the place it began, and she was returning too, gliding toward her favorite spot on the lake, the place where she felt most safe, most at home. as twilight deepened, the first stars appeared, faint at first, then growing brighter as the sky darkened. The moon rose, not full tonight, but still generous with its light, still bright enough to paint silver paths across the water. Fionnuala felt the day's energies settling, felt her body preparing for rest, felt the familiar peace descending like a blanket, soft and warm and welcome. She tucked her head beneath her wing and let the water take her weight. The lake held her faithfully, rocked her gently, began its nightly work of healing and rest. The world grew quiet around her, settling into its own rhythms, its own patterns of sleep and waking, of rising and falling, of breath and heartbeat, and the eternal flow of time that carried everything forward, carried everything home. And so the nights passed, one after another, like pearls on a string, each one beautiful and complete in itself, each one adding to the long necklace of days and nights that made up her life on the lake. The seasons turned slowly, almost imperceptibly, marked by subtle changes in the air's temperature, in the angle of sunlight, in the behavior of other creatures sharing the water with her. When autumn came, it came gently, without fanfare or sudden drama. The leaves on the willows turned from green to gold, then to brown, and began to fall one by one, drifting down to float on the water's surface like tiny boats, golden and brown boats that circled slowly in the current, creating patterns that shifted and changed with each breath of wind. Fionnuala would glide among these fallen leaves, watching them scatter before her like schools of fish, then settle again in her wake. The air grew crisper at night, carrying the scent of wood smoke from distant cottages where people prepared for winter, and the smell of earth getting ready to sleep, and apples ripening in hidden orchards beyond the hills. The stars seemed brighter in the autumn sky, sharper and more distinct, as if the cooler air made them come into focus. The moon, too, seemed more present, its light more defined, creating shadows with harder edges than the soft shadows of summer. But the water remained warm for a long time, holding summer's heat in its depths, releasing it slowly through the cooling nights. Fionnuala felt this warmth beneath her when she floated, felt it rising up through the water to meet the cold air descending from above, and she existed in the meeting place of these two temperatures, in the space between summer's lingering gift and winter's approaching presence. The other birds began to leave. The swallows that had swooped and dived over the water all summer long disappeared one morning, gone south to follow the sun to find warmth in distant lands. The geese that had nested in the reeds gathered in noisy flocks and flew away in great V formations, their honking calls fading gradually into silence as they disappeared over the southern horizon. Even some of the swans departed, wild ones following ancient instincts, ancient migration routes written in their blood and bones. But Fionnuala stayed. She had nowhere else to go, and besides, she had grown to love this place in all its seasons, not just summer's easy warmth. She wanted to see how the lake would look in winter, how it would feel when frost rimmed the reeds and ice formed in the shallows. She wanted to know this place completely, to experience it through every change, every transformation that the turning year would bring. Her brothers stayed too, bound by the same enchantment, the same quiet acceptance of their fate. They gathered together more often now as the days shortened, floating in a close group, their white forms brilliant against the darkening water, like a constellation of stars reflected from the sky above. There was comfort in their proximity, in knowing they were together, that whatever came, they would face it as a family, united by blood and by the shared experience of transformation. The first frost came on a clear, cold night when the moon was just past full. Fionnuala woke before dawn to find the reeds coated in white, each blade outlined in ice crystals that caught the first light and turned it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The air was sharp and clean, burning slightly in her nostrils when she breathed, carrying the scent of ice and sleeping earth and the mineral smell of stone. The shallows had frozen overnight, a thin skim of ice extending perhaps 20 feet from the shore. Delicate and temporary, but still there, still real, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and strange and beautiful. Fionnuala paddled to the edge of this ice and touched it gently with her bill, felt it crack beneath the pressure, watched the fracture lines spread outward like lightning frozen in time. The ice was thin enough to break easily, not yet a barrier, just a promise of what would come when winter deepened. She broke through this ice and glided into the shallows, felt the cold water on her feet and legs, noticed how different it felt from summer's warmth, how it woke her up completely, made her more alert, more present. The cold wasn't painful, just intense, just demanding of her attention in a way that warm water never did. It reminded her that she was alive, that she had a body, that she existed as something separate from the water even as the water held her. As the sun rose higher, the ice melted, dripping from the reeds, vanishing from the shallows, leaving no trace of its presence except for a slight chill in the water and the memory of how it had looked. Crystalline and perfect in the early light. Fionnuala understood that this would happen many times, ice forming at night, melting by day, a dance between cold and warmth that would continue until winter, grew strong enough to make ice that lasted, ice that accumulated and thickened and spread until the lake's entire surface was covered. But that time was still weeks away, maybe months. For now, the lake remained mostly open, mostly liquid, still welcoming to her presence, still able to hold her and rock her and provide her with food and shelter and peace. She made the most of these in-between days, these transition times, knowing they were fleeting, knowing that change was coming, but not here yet, suspended in that pregnant pause before transformation. The days grew shorter, the nights longer. Darkness came earlier each evening, arrived like a guest who overstayed a little more each visit. But Fionnuala didn't mind the darkness. She had learned to love it, to find comfort in it, to see it not as absence of light but as presence of something else. Mystery, rest, the quiet spaces where the world could dream and restore itself. The long nights gave her more time to float in peace, more time to watch the stars wheel overhead, more time to sink into the deep rest that came when there was nothing to do but be held by water and wait for morning. She noticed how the moonlight changed throughout the month, how it grew from a thin crescent to a full circle, and then diminished again, waxing and waning in a rhythm that felt like breathing, like the lake's breathing, like her own breathing, all connected, all part of one vast inhale and exhale that encompassed the entire world. When the moon was full, the nights were brilliant and easy to navigate, everything visible and clear. When the moon was new, the nights were profoundly dark and the stars dominated, and she had to trust the water completely, trust that it would hold her even when she couldn't see it, even when she couldn't see anything at all. These dark moon nights were the most restful of all, she discovered. Without light to see by, without the ability to observe the world around her, she was forced to turn inward, to experience existence from the inside rather than the outside. She became more aware of her body's sensations, the feel of feathers against skin, the movement of water against breast, the subtle shifts of balance that kept her upright, the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. She became more aware of sounds. Every splash, every rustle, every call from distant creatures seemed amplified in the darkness, seemed to carry meaning and message. And in this heightened awareness, she found a deeper peace, a peace that didn't depend on anything external, that arose from within her own being, from some source that was always there, always available, always ready to fill her with calm and quiet and contentment. This peace was her birthright, she realized, not something she had to earn or achieve or deserve, but simply something she was, something that existed at her core, like the water existed at the core of the lake, essential and unchanging and always present. The winter birds arrived to replace the summer ones. Ducks came in great rafts, floating together in the deeper water, diving for food, their calls echoing across the lake in the cold air. Mergansers with their punk rock crests and sawbill beaks. Buffleheads tiny and energetic, constantly diving and resurfacing. Golden eyes with their distinctive whistling wing beats. Each species brought its own character, its own way of being, its own relationship with the water. Fionnuala watched them all with interest and affection. She felt no competition with them, no sense that their presence diminished her own. The lake was large enough for everyone, generous enough to feed them all, patient enough to hold them all on its surface without complaint or favoritism. There was abundance here, she understood now, more than enough for all who came seeking shelter and sustenance and rest. The trees around the lake stood bare now, their branches stark and beautiful against the winter sky, creating delicate patterns of line and negative space that changed with every viewing angle, with every shift of light. Without their leaves, the willows looked different, more sculptural, their long branches hanging like living curtains that moved in the wind, creating music. A dry rustling sound, different from the sound they made with leaves, but equally beautiful in its own way. Snow came. Not much at first, just a light dusting that coated everything in white, made the world look clean and new and simplified. The snow fell at night while Fionnuala slept, and she woke to find a transformed landscape, everything familiar now, strange, everything recognizable, now mysterious. The hills were white, the bare trees were outlined in white, and the reeds wore white caps like old men in winter hats. The snow on the water melted immediately, disappearing as soon as it touched the surface, but the snow on the land stayed, at least for a day or two, until the sun melted it or rain washed it away. During these snowy times, Fionnuala felt even more grateful for the water, for its liquid warmth, for the way it remained unchanged by weather, remained itself no matter what fell from the sky, no matter how cold the air became. More snow came, heavier this time, falling thick and fast from a gray sky that seemed close enough to touch. The flakes were large and soft, landing on Fionnuala's feathers and sitting there for a moment before melting, each one a tiny miracle of geometry, a six-pointed star made of ice and air and water. She watched them accumulate on her wings, watched them glisten and sparkle before they melted, watched the water from their melting bead up and roll off her waterproof feathers like mercury, like liquid silver. The lake began to freeze more seriously now. Ice foamed not just in the shallows, but further out, creeping toward the center, growing thicker each night, becoming permanent rather than temporary. The open water grew smaller, became a shrinking circle surrounded by expanding ice. Fionnuala and the other waterfowl concentrated in this remaining open water, all of them together now, kept close by necessity, by the ice that prevented them from spreading out across the lake as they had in warmer months. But even this compression didn't feel confining. There was still enough room, still enough water for everyone to float comfortably, to find food, to rest. And there was something cozy about being together, something communal and warm about sharing the smaller space, about existing in close proximity to others of your kind and other kinds, all of you making your way through winter together, all of you relying on the same patch of water, the same liquid space in an increasingly solid world. The ice created new sounds. It cracked and groaned and shifted, adjusting to changes in temperature, expanding and contracting, creating its own language of pops and booms and sharp reports that echoed across the frozen landscape. At first, these sounds were alarming, but Fionnuala grew used to them, learned to recognize them as the ice's natural voice, its way of expressing itself, its way of being alive and active even in its frozen state. She discovered she could walk on the ice when it grew thick enough, though walking felt awkward after so many months of swimming and floating. Her webbed feet slipped and slid on the smooth surface, and she had to move carefully, deliberately, finding her balance with each step. But there was something satisfying about being on solid ground again, even if that ground was frozen water, even if it was temporary and would melt when spring came. From the ice, she could see the lake differently, could see how vast it was, how it extended in all directions to distant shores. She could see the patterns the wind made on the snow-covered ice, the drifts and ridges, the smooth places and rough places. She could see her own tracks behind her, the marks her feet made on the snow, proof of her passage, evidence that she had been here, that she existed, that she moved through the world leaving traces. But mostly she stayed in the water, in the open patch that remained at the lake center where the current kept the ice from forming, where the depth prevented freezing, where liquid warmth persisted despite the cold air and the frozen surroundings. Here she felt safe, felt like herself, felt at home in the element that had become more familiar than land, more comfortable than air, more essential than anything else. The shortest day of the year came and went, almost unnoticed except for the fact that afterward, the days began to lengthen again, slowly, imperceptibly, but definitely. The sun began its long journey back toward summer, began its arc toward warmth and growth and longer light. Winter would continue for months yet, would deepen and intensify before it released its grip, but the turning point had passed. The moment of maximum darkness was behind them, and now, slowly, gradually, light was returning. Fionnuala felt this turning even though she couldn't see it, couldn't measure it, couldn't prove it with any external evidence. She felt it in her bones, in her blood, in some deep place that was connected to the earth's cycles, to the sun's movements, to the great wheel of seasons that turned forever, carrying everything along with it, winter too. Spring to summer to autumn and back to winter again, endlessly, eternally, without beginning or end. The coldest part of winter came in January and February, when the ice was thickest and the snow deepest and the air so cold it hurt to breathe. The open water at the lake center grew smaller, became just a pond in the middle of a frozen plain. All the waterfowl crowded together now, packed close, keeping the water open by their constant movement, by their collective body heat, by their determination to maintain this one liquid space in a frozen world. Fionnuala had never experienced such cold. It was cold that penetrated through her feathers, cold that made her muscles ache, cold that required constant eating to maintain enough energy to stay warm. She and the other birds dove constantly, brought up water plants and small creatures from the bottom, ate and ate and ate, fueling the internal fires that kept them alive, that kept them warm enough to survive. But even in this extremity, there was a strange peace, a sense that this too was part of the cycle, part of the natural flow of things, part of what it meant to live on the lake, to be a swan, to exist as a creature of water and air. The cold was harsh but not cruel. It simply was what it was, neutral and impersonal, asking nothing, giving nothing, just being cold the way fire was hot, the way water was wet, the way stone was hard. And there were moments of incredible beauty, even in the depths of winter. Mornings when the sun rose behind the frozen reeds and turned them into lines of gold and amber, when the ice glowed pink and orange, when the whole world seemed made of light and color despite the cold. Nights when the stars were so bright and numerous they seemed to crowd the sky, when the aurora borealis appeared like curtains of green and purple light rippling across the northern horizon, when the air was so clear and still that sound carried for miles and miles. Fionuala stored these moments in her memory like treasure, like jewels collected and kept safe for times when beauty seemed scarce. She knew that these experiences were shaping her, changing her, teaching her things that could only be learned through direct experience, through living through winter, through enduring cold and scarcity and hardship. And discovering that she was stronger than she knew, more resilient than she imagined, more capable of adapting and surviving than she would have believed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the days did grow longer. The sun rose a minute earlier, set a minute later. A minute didn't seem like much, but minutes accumulated into hours, hours into days, and gradually, definitely, light was winning its battle against darkness. Warmth was beginning its campaign against cold. The ice was still thick, the snow still deep, but something had changed. Some subtle shift had occurred, and the direction of movement was now toward spring rather than toward deeper winter. The first hints of thaw came on a warm day in late February when the temperature rose above freezing and stayed there. Water began to drip from the ice, to pool on its surface, to run in tiny streams toward the open water at the center. The snow grew heavy and wet, began to compact and settle. The air smelled different, less sharp, more soft, carrying the first faint promise of growing things, of earth awakening, of life preparing to surge forth again after its long winter sleep. Fionuala felt this promise in the air and in the water, felt it in her own body as something quickening, something stirring, some part of herself that had been dormant now beginning to wake. She preened her feathers more carefully, paying attention to their condition, making sure they were clean and properly aligned and waterproof. She ate more, building up reserves of energy. She felt restless, eager, ready for change, even as she appreciated the peace of winter, the quiet beauty of ice and snow. The ice broke up gradually over the course of several weeks, retreating toward the shores, leaving larger and larger areas of open water. First the center opened completely, then wider circles expanded outward, then only the shallows remained frozen, then only the very edges, and finally, one morning in early March, the last ice was gone, and the entire lake was liquid again, free and open and sparkling under a strengthening sun. The transformation was miraculous. What had been a frozen plain became once more a living body of water, moving and breathing and full of life. The water plants began to grow, sending up shoots from the bottom. Small fish became active again, flashing silver in the shallows. Frogs emerged from the mud and began their spring songs, tentative at first, then growing bolder and more insistent until the nights echoed with their chorus. Birds returned. The swallows came back, swooping low over the water, catching insects that hatched in clouds above the surface. The geese returned in their V formations, honking their greetings, landing with great splashes, reclaiming their nesting territories. Even the swans who had migrated south returned, appearing one morning as if they had never left, settling back into the lake's rhythms as naturally as breathing. Fionuala felt the surge of spring energy all around her, felt it in the warming water, in the lengthening days, in the greening of the land. The willows budded, their branches becoming tinged with green, then bursting into full leaf seemingly overnight. Flowers bloomed along the shore, yellow iris in the wet places, bluebells in the woods beyond, wild roses climbing over stone walls. The whole world was waking up, coming alive, celebrating survival, celebrating the return of warmth and light and growth. She spent long days exploring the lake again, rediscovering places that had been hidden under ice, seeing how they had changed, how they had survived the winter. Everything looked fresh and new, washed clean by snow and ice, ready to begin again. She felt this same readiness in herself, this sense of renewal, of starting over, of having been transformed by the winter into something stronger and wiser and more complete. Summer returned, as summers always do, bringing with it warmth and plenty and long lazy days of floating in peace. The lake became crowded with life again, dragonflies hovering above the water, turtles basking on logs, young birds learning to swim, fish jumping at dawn and dusk. Fionnuala moved through this abundance with gratitude and wonder, appreciating it more deeply because she had experienced its absence, had lived through the time when the lake was. Frozen and food was scarce, and survival required constant effort. She had learned so much in her years on the lake. She had learned patience and acceptance. She had learned that transformation, even unwanted transformation, could lead to unexpected gifts. She had learned that home was not a place but a feeling, not a structure, but a state of being, not something external but something carried within. She had learned that peace was always available, always present, waiting to be noticed beneath the surface of whatever was happening. The seasons continued their turning. Autumn came again, then winter, then spring, then summer, over and over, each cycle deepening her understanding, each revolution of the wheel teaching her something new, while also teaching her that nothing was truly new, that everything had happened before and would happen again, that she was part of a pattern much larger than herself, a dance. That had been dancing since the beginning of time, and would continue long after she was gone. Years passed. Fionnuala couldn't count them, didn't try to count them, simply lived through them one day at a time, one season at a time, one breath at a time. Her brothers remained with her, and together they became part of the lake's eternal story, 4 white swans who floated through all seasons, who witnessed all changes, who remained constant while everything around them transformed and transformed again. She grew to love the lake with a love that was beyond words, beyond thought, beyond any ability to express or explain. It was the love of someone for their truest home, the love of a creature for its element, the love that arises when you finally stop fighting and surrender completely to what is. The lake had given her everything: shelter and food, beauty and peace, healing and rest. It had held her through cold and warmth, through darkness and light, through every moment of every day and night, for longer than memory could reach. And now, as evening comes to the lake once more, as the sun descends toward the western hills painting the sky in those familiar shades of gold and rose and purple, Fionnuala finds her spot again. That same spot where she has rested so many nights, where the water is deep enough and calm enough and perfect enough for floating, for surrendering, for letting go completely. The moonlight returns, spilling across the water like liquid silver, and she positions herself in its glow, feeling its gentle touch on her feathers, its soft illumination of the night world around her. The familiar sounds arise: frogs singing, wind in the willows, the occasional splash of a fish, the calls of night birds beginning their dark journeys. Everything is as it has always been, as it will always be, unchanging in its constant change, eternal in its endless transformation. She tucks her head beneath her wing one final time, feels the water take her weight, feels the familiar rocking begin, gentle and patient and completely trustworthy. Her breathing slows and deepens. Her heart settles into its resting rhythm. Her body releases all tension, all effort, all the small holdings that keep her separate from the world. She becomes water and air and moonlight, becomes peace itself, becomes rest embodied. And in this perfect moment, floating on the lake that has been her home and her healing and her peace for so long, Fionnuala understands that she has always been free. The swan form was never a prison but a gift, a way of teaching her what she needed to learn, a way of showing her that transformation is not loss, but discovery. She is exactly where she belongs, exactly who she's meant to be, exactly enough just as she is. The lake holds her, the night embraces her. The moon watches over her with its ancient patient gaze. And she rests, completely and utterly at rest, safe and warm and whole, floating on the surface of this beautiful world, held by waters that will never let her fall. As this tale settles into the quiet places of your own heart, let yourself drift like Fionnuala on her moonlit lake. The gentle sounds of water lapping at the shore reach you now, soft and rhythmic, as constant as breathing, as steady as the pulse in your own chest. The night air is cool and peaceful, carrying with it the scent of water and growing things, the smell of earth at rest, the fragrance of peace itself. You can feel yourself floating now, held by something vast and kind, something that asks nothing of you except that you allow yourself to be held. Your body grows heavy, pleasantly heavy, sinking deeper into whatever surface supports you. This heaviness is good, is welcome, is exactly right. There is no need to move, no need to think, no need to do anything at all. The moonlight that touched Fionnuala's feathers touches you now, soft and silver, washing over you in gentle waves that carry away tension, carry away worry, carry away everything except this moment of perfect rest. You are safe here, completely safe. Nothing can disturb you, nothing can harm you, nothing can reach you except peace and comfort and the deep quiet of night settling around you like a blessing. Your breathing slows without you trying to slow it. Each exhale lasts a little longer, carries you a little deeper into rest. Each inhale is shallow and easy, requiring no effort, happening on its own, the way breathing always does when you stop thinking about it, when you stop trying to control it, when you simply let your body breathe itself. The lake of sleep is beneath you now, holding you, rocking you, just as it held and rocked Fionnuala through all those nights, all those seasons, all those years of peace. You can trust this water. It has held countless sleepers before you, will hold countless more after you, holds you now with the same patience and care it has always offered to all who come seeking rest. Your eyelids are heavy, so heavy, like soft curtains weighted with night, drawing closed naturally, effortlessly, needing no help from you, simply falling the way curtains fall, the way night falls, the way sleep falls over a world that is ready to rest. Behind these closed eyes, darkness waits. Kind darkness, gentle darkness, the darkness that heals and restores and makes everything new again. The sounds around you are fading now, growing distant and muffled, as if you were sinking below the surface of the world, descending into deeper waters where sound doesn't reach, where only silence lives. Profound and peaceful silence that holds you like water, surrounds you like air, fills you like moonlight, filling a lake. Your thoughts are slowing, becoming longer, more drawn out, stretching like shadows at sunset, growing thinner and more transparent until they barely exist at all, until there is nothing left but this, the feeling of being. Held, the sensation of floating, the knowledge that you are safe and you can rest now, you can finally rest. Time has stopped meaning anything. There is no clock, no schedule, no tomorrow that needs preparing for, no yesterday that needs remembering. There is only this eternal now, this moment that stretches out forever in all directions, this present that has no beginning and no end, just this floating, this resting, this perfect peace. The lake breathes beneath you, rises and falls in gentle swells that rock you like a cradle, like a boat on calm water, like a child in loving arms. You move with these swells without resistance, without thought, simply following where they lead, trusting completely that they lead toward sleep, toward rest, toward the deep renewal that comes when you surrender everything. Your body knows how to sleep. It has always known. It doesn't need instructions or effort or any help from your conscious mind. It simply needs permission, needs you to step aside, needs you to stop trying and start allowing. And you are allowing now. You are permitting. You are giving your body the gift of doing what it was designed to do. Sleep is coming closer. You can feel its approach like you can feel dusk approaching, even with your eyes closed, like you can sense the tide coming in, even when you can't see the water. It moves toward you inevitably, naturally, bringing with it the promise of dreams and healing and the deep rest that makes tomorrow possible. Nothing to do now except let go. Let go of the day and all its concerns. Let go of your name and your story and your identity. Let go of trying and striving and achieving. Let go of everything except this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this floating on dark, peaceful waters that want only to hold you, to rock you, to carry you into sleep. The moonlight is fading now, or perhaps your awareness of it is fading, growing dimmer and softer and more distant until it is just a memory of light, just an echo of silver, just the faintest glow at the edges of consciousness. And that is fine. You don't need light anymore. Darkness is enough. Darkness is everything. Darkness is where sleep lives and where you are going now. Your breath barely moves your chest. So shallow now, so quiet, like wind through reeds, like water over stones, like all the gentle sounds that nature makes when it is at rest. Your heart beats slow and strong, patient and sure, doing its work without you, keeping you alive while you sleep, asking nothing of you, giving everything. The water beneath you is everywhere now, above and below, all around, until you can't tell anymore where you end, and the water begins until you have merged with it completely, dissolved into it, become one with this vast gentle presence that holds all things, that rocks all things, that loves all things with a love that never wavers, never judges, never asks for anything in return. You are floating in an ocean of peace. You are drifting in a sea of quiet. You are suspended in depths that have no bottom, held by currents that flow forever, carried by tides that know exactly where you need to go. And where you need to go is sleep, is rest, is the place where all burdens are laid down, where all tensions dissolve, where all the trying stops and the being begins. Almost there now. Almost completely at rest. Just a little further into this darkness, this silence, this perfect peace. Just a little deeper into these waters that want only your surrender, your trust, your willingness to let go completely and fall into the arms of sleep that have been waiting for you all along. Very safe here, very quiet, very still. Nothing moving except your breath. And even that barely moving, barely there, so soft and subtle. It is almost nothing, almost already the breathing of sleep, the breathing of someone who has crossed over into that other world where consciousness releases its grip and dreams begin to unfold like flowers opening in darkness. The lake holds Pianuala. The night holds you. The same peace, the same rest, the same gentle darkness embracing everything, making no distinction between swan and human, between then and now, between story and listener. All of it one thing, one moment, one vast eternal present where sleep is always available, always near, always ready to receive anyone who comes seeking rest. Sleep comes on its own. Let it find you gently. Morning came softly, as mornings always did on the lake, arriving not with sudden brightness, but with a gradual lightening of the darkness, a slow transformation from black to gray to pearl to the palest blue. Fionnuala stirred in her sleep, feeling warmth on her closed eyelids before she felt anything else, sensing the sun's approach before she opened her eyes to witness it. The water still held her, patient and faithful as always, its temperature slightly warmer now after the night's rest, heated incrementally by her own body, by the earth beneath, by the approaching day. She could feel tiny movements in the water fish beginning their morning activities, currents shifting as the wind changed direction, the almost imperceptible flow that told her the lake was waking too, stirring from its own deep rest. She opened her eyes slowly, gradually, letting light enter in stages, adjusting to brightness after so many hours of darkness. The world that appeared before her was washed in dawn colors, everything tinged with gold and rose, the light so gentle and forgiving that even the plainest things looked beautiful. The gray rocks on the shore, the brown reeds, the still dark water that reflected the colorful sky like a mirror tilted toward heaven. Mist rose from the lake's surface in pillars and sheets and drifting clouds, creating an otherworld feeling, making the familiar landscape strange and magical and new. Through this mist, other swans glided like ghosts, their white forms appearing and disappearing as the mist thickened and thinned, as currents of air moved it around, as the strengthening sun began its slow work of dissolving it altogether. Fionnuala felt completely rested, more rested than seems possible from one night's sleep, as if she had slept for weeks or months, as if the sleep had been so deep and so complete that it had reached places in her that usually remained untouched, had healed things that usually stayed broken, had refreshed parts of herself she didn't even know existed. She felt light, almost weightless, as if she might float up into the air without even trying, as if gravity had loosened its grip on her during the night. She stretched her wings wide, extending them to their full span, feeling each feather separate and fan out, feeling the morning air move between them, cool and fresh and full of promise. The stretch felt glorious, felt necessary, felt like something her body had been waiting all night to do. She held the pose for a long moment, wings spread wide like an angel, like a blessing, like a swan made of light and air and morning itself. Then she folded her wings again, tucked them neatly against her sides, and began to glide slowly across the misty water. Her movement created ripples that spread outward in perfect circles, disturbing the mirror surface, creating patterns that caught the light and transformed it into dancing sparks and gleams. She moved without destination, simply following the feeling of movement, the pleasure of gliding through this transformed world where everything familiar had become strange and beautiful and new. The mist swirled around her as she moved through it, parting before her breast, closing behind her wake, constantly shifting and changing and rearranging itself into new shapes and patterns. Sometimes it was thick enough that she couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction, and she existed in a small bubble of visibility, a private world that moved with her, that was hers alone. Other times it thinned enough that she could see through it to the shore, to the willows, to the hills beyond, all of them softened and blurred and made dreamlike by the veil of moisture hanging in the air. She heard other birds waking around her, the first tentative songs, the calls and responses, the rustling of feathers as creatures stirred in nests and roosts and hiding places. A heron stood in the shallows like a statue, absolutely motionless, waiting with infinite patience for a fish to swim within striking distance. Ducks paddled past, quacking softly to each other, their voices intimate and conversational in the quiet morning. A kingfisher sat on a branch overhanging the water, its brilliant blue and orange feathers jewel bright even in the soft dawn light. The sun rose higher, burning through the mist, dispersing it gradually until the whole lake was revealed again in full morning light. The transformation was like watching a curtain being drawn back, like witnessing a magic trick where the invisible becomes visible, where the hidden becomes known. What had been mysterious and otherworldly became ordinary again, became simply the lake she knew so well, the familiar landscape she had inhabited for so long. But even ordinary things held magic this morning. Even the simple sight of water reflecting sky, of reeds growing in the shallows, of willows trailing their branches in the water, held a beauty that made her chest ache with joy. She had seen these things countless times before, had watched countless sunrises paint them in countless variations of light and color, and yet each time felt like the first time. Each viewing held the freshness of discovery. Each moment contained its own unique beauty that had never existed before and would never exist again. Fionnuala realized, not for the first time but with renewed clarity, that this was what it meant to be fully alive. To see the world with fresh eyes each day, to find wonder in the ordinary, to recognize that each moment was precious and fleeting and would never come again. The lake taught her this daily, showed her through its constant changes that nothing was permanent, everything was flowing, and the only way to truly live was to be present, to pay attention, to notice what was happening right now in this one irreplaceable moment. She found food easily in the warming water-tender shoots of water plants, small aquatic insects, tiny fish that darted among the weeds. She ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, grateful for the abundance, grateful for the lake's generosity that fed her body so that her body could continue its work of keeping her alive, keeping her conscious, keeping her able to experience this beautiful world and all its gifts. Other swans joined her as the morning progressed, her brothers and the wild swans who shared the lake, all of them feeding together in companionable silence, occasionally making soft sounds to each other, contact calls that said simply, "I am here, you are there, we are together." There was comfort in this company, in not being alone, in being part of a community, even if that community didn't speak in words, didn't share stories or histories or plans for the future, but simply existed together in the present moment, sharing space and water and morning light. After feeding, Fionnuala spent time preening, running her bill carefully through her feathers, arranging them in perfect order, waterproofing them with oil from the gland near her tail. This work was meditative, requiring attention but not thought, occupying her body while her mind drifted free, contemplating nothing in particular, simply resting. In the pleasant sensations of grooming, of caring for herself, of maintaining the beautiful white plumage that was both her protection and her identity. The day warmed as the sun climbed higher. Fionnuala moved to deeper water where it was cooler, where she could float in comfort without the heat becoming oppressive. She positioned herself where a light breeze could reach her, feeling it ruffle her feathers, cooling her skin beneath, carrying scents from the land. Wild herbs, sun-warmed earth, flowers blooming in hidden meadows beyond the hills. She half closed her eyes and let herself drift in a state between sleeping and waking, a peaceful, drowsy state where thoughts came and went like clouds, where sensations became more vivid, while mental activity decreased, where time seemed to stop, or at least slow down to a pace that felt natural, that felt right, that felt like the speed at which life was meant to be lived. In this state, memories arose unbidden, not the clear, sharp memories of recent events, but older, hazier memories that felt more like dreams than recollections. She remembered walking on human legs, though the sensation was now so foreign, it was hard to believe she had ever moved that way. She remembered voices speaking in human words, though she could no longer recall what those words meant or what language they belonged to. She remembered a great hall with fires burning and music playing. Though these memories were so faded and dreamlike, they might have been invented, might have been stories she had told herself rather than actual experiences. And she realized it didn't matter whether these memories were real or imagined, whether they belonged to her past or to some story she had absorbed from the air around her. What mattered was now. This water beneath her, this sky above her, this body that was hers, these feathers that grew from her skin, this heart that beat in her chest, this breath that moved in and out carrying life with it. The past was gone. The future hadn't arrived, and only this moment was real, only now existed. Only the present held any power or truth or meaning. The realization brought profound peace, a settling that happened somewhere deep in her core, a letting go of something she hadn't even known she was holding. She stopped trying to remember, stopped trying to understand, stopped trying to make sense of her life or give it meaning or fit it into some narrative that explained everything. She simply existed, simply was, simply floated on water under sky, with nothing to prove and nothing to achieve, and nowhere to be except exactly here, exactly now, exactly this. Hours passed, though she didn't count them or even notice them passing. The sun traced its arc across the sky. Shadows moved and lengthened. Light changed quality from the clear brightness of morning to the golden warmth of afternoon to the amber glow of approaching evening. Through all these changes, Fionnuala remained in her state of peaceful floating, her mind quiet, her body relaxed, her spirit resting in a way that went deeper than sleep, that touched something eternal and unchanging beneath the surface of constant change. When she finally stirred and opened her eyes fully, the day was approaching its end. The sun hung low over the western hills, painting everything in shades of gold and orange that seemed almost too beautiful to be real, too perfect to belong to the ordinary world. The water had gone completely calm, smooth as glass, reflecting the colorful sky so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where water ended and sky began, creating the illusion that she floated suspended in the middle of endless colored space, held between two infinities. She glided slowly toward the shore, toward the willows whose shadows now stretched long across the water, creating dark stripes on the golden surface. As she entered these shadows, the temperature dropped slightly, a welcome coolness after the day's warmth. The willow's branches hung low enough that she could pass beneath them, entering a green cave where filtered light created patterns on the water, where the world outside seemed distant and unreal, where she existed in a private space that felt both cozy and vast, both sheltering and free. Here in the willow's embrace, Fionnuala paused and looked back toward the open water where the sun was setting. She watched the colors intensify as the sun touched the horizon, watched the sky turn from gold to orange to deep red to purple, watched stars begin to appear one by one in the darkening eastern sky. She watched day transform into night, light transform into darkness, and she understood that this transformation happened constantly, that the world was always changing, always becoming something else, and that this endless transformation was not something to fear or resist, but something to celebrate, something to embrace, something that made life rich and varied and endlessly interesting. The first stars appeared, faint at first, growing brighter as the sky darkened. Venus hung in the west, brilliant and steady, the evening star that always appeared first, faithful and constant, a point of light that had guided travelers for thousands of years, that had witnessed countless sunsets, that would continue to shine long after she was gone. Fionnuala watched this star with affection, with recognition, with the feeling you have when you see an old friend after a long absence. Darkness fell completely, and with it came the familiar peace of night, the softness, the quiet, the sense of the world settling down to rest. The moon rose, nearly full again, its light spilling across the water like liquid silver, creating a path that seemed to lead somewhere magical, somewhere beyond the ordinary world, somewhere that called to her with wordless invitation. Fionuala left the shelter of the willows and glided out into the moonlit water, following that silver path toward the lake's center. The moonlight transformed everything it touched, made the familiar landscape strange and otherworldly, turned the lake into a mirror, reflecting not just the sky, but some deeper reality, some truer world that existed beneath the surface of ordinary seeing. As she moved through this moonlit water, she became aware of how the light interacted with her feathers, how each individual feather caught and held the glow, how she herself seemed to be made of moonlight, seemed to be luminous, seemed to carry light within her as well as upon her. She looked at her own reflection in the still water and saw a creature of impossible beauty, a white swan glowing silver bright against dark water, surrounded by reflected stars, moving through a world made entirely of light and shadow and the mysterious space between them. The night air was cool but not cold, pleasant against her skin, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers from the shore, of water lilies closing their petals for darkness, of damp earth and growing things, and the mineral smell of stone. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with this night air, feeling it circulate through her body, nourishing her, connecting her to the world around her through the simple act of breathing. A fish jumped nearby, breaking the surface with a splash that seemed loud in the quiet night. The ripples spread outward in perfect circles, catching the moonlight, creating moving patterns of light and shadow that expanded and overlapped, and gradually dissolved back into stillness. Fionnuala watched these ripples with fascination, seeing in them a metaphor for existence itself. How every action creates ripples, how these ripples spread, outward affecting everything they touch, how eventually they fade but never completely disappear, absorbed into the larger whole, becoming part of the lake's eternal memory. She thought about all the ripples she had created in her time on the lake, all the movements and actions and simple fact of her presence, all the tiny disturbances she had made on the water's surface. Each one had spread outward, had touched the shore, had interacted with other ripples from other sources, had become part of the complex pattern of waves and currents that gave the lake its character, its personality, its unique way of being. And she realized that this was true not just of physical ripples, but of everything. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of awareness sent ripples out into the world, affected things in ways both visible and invisible, created changes that spread far beyond their point of origin. She was not separate from the world, but intimately connected to it, woven into its fabric, part of its ongoing creation and recreation of itself moment by moment. This understanding brought a sense of responsibility, but also a sense of belonging, a recognition that she mattered, that her existence made a difference, that even as one small swan on one small lake, she was part of something vast and important and meaningful. She was not insignificant but essential, not separate, but connected, not alone but embraced by the whole living world that surrounded her and included her, and would never let her go. The moon climbed higher, smaller now, more distant but still bright enough to cast clear shadows, to light the night almost like day, to make everything visible in shades of silver and gray and deepest black. Fionnuala could see the far shore clearly, could see individual trees outlined against the sky, could see the shapes of hills and the dark mass of mountains beyond, could see everything laid out before her like a map, a landscape that was hers to inhabit, hers to explore, hers to love. She began to swim in wide circles, creating a spiral pattern on the water, moving outward from a central point and then back inward, tracing invisible geometries, following intuitions rather than plans, letting her body choose her path without interference from her mind. The movement was meditative, hypnotic, creating its own rhythm that her breathing synchronized with, that her heartbeat echoed, that seemed to resonate with some deeper rhythm in the earth itself, in the turning of the planet, in the pulse of existence that underlay everything. As she swam, she became aware of other presences in the water, not just fish and water plants, but something more subtle, more ethereal, harder to define. The lake had spirits, she had always known this, felt their presence without seeing them, sensed their consciousness without hearing their voices. They were ancient and patient, these lake spirits. As old as the water itself, perhaps older. Perhaps they had been here before the lake was formed. Perhaps they had called the water to fill this basin, had invited it to settle here, to make its home in this particular valley, surrounded by these particular hills. These spirits watched over the lake and all who lived in or on it, she believed. They kept the water clean and sweet, maintained the delicate balance of life that allowed so many creatures to thrive here, protected the lake from harm or pollution, or the carelessness of humans who didn't understand how precious and fragile this ecosystem was. They were guardians, caretakers, the invisible keepers of this place's soul. Fionnuala had never seen these spirits, at least not in any visible form, but she felt their presence most strongly on nights like this, nights of full moon when the veil between worlds seemed thinnest, when magic felt possible, when the ordinary world seemed infused with extraordinary beauty and meaning. On these nights, she sometimes whispered thanks to the spirits, wordless gratitude that she sent out into the night air, into the water, into the moonlight itself, hoping they would receive it and understand that she appreciated their care, that she recognized their work, that she honored their presence. Tonight she did this again, pausing in her circular swimming to float motionless on the silver water, tilting her head back to look at the moon, opening herself to the night, to the lake, to whatever invisible presences might be listening. She sent her gratitude out like a prayer, like an offering, like a gift given freely without expectation of return. And in the silence that followed, she felt something respond. Not in words or images, but in a feeling, a warmth that seemed to rise from the water itself, an embrace that was gentle but unmistakable, an acknowledgement that her message had been received and accepted and valued. This exchange filled her with joy, pure and uncomplicated joy that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, that overflowed and spread through her entire body, that made her want to sing or dance, or somehow express what she was feeling. But she had no voice for singing, not in human way, only the soft calls that swans made, and these seemed inadequate to carry the fullness of what she felt. So instead, she expressed her joy through movement, through a dance on the water, gliding and turning and dipping her head beneath the surface and rising again, creating a performance for an audience of moon and stars and lake spirits and the night itself. She moved with grace and abandon, forgetting self-consciousness, forgetting everything except the pure pleasure of movement, of being alive, of existing in this beautiful world at this perfect moment. When she finally stopped, breathing heavily from the exertion, her heart racing with excitement and effort, she felt more alive than she could remember feeling, more present, more real, more completely herself. The dance had released something in her, had broken through some barrier she hadn't known existed, had freed her from some constraint that had been limiting her without her awareness. She floated in the aftermath of this release, feeling her heartbeat gradually slow, feeling her breathing return to normal, feeling the excitement settle into a deeper, calmer joy, a contentment that was quieter but no less real, no less powerful. She understood now that joy didn't have to be wild or ecstatic, didn't have to be expressed through dramatic gestures or loud sounds. Joy could be quiet, could be gentle, could be as simple as floating on moonlit water, breathing night air, existing as yourself in this one moment that was all you ever really had. The night deepened. Other creatures settled into their own patterns of rest or activity. Owls hunted on silent wings over the meadows. Foxes prowled the shoreline seeking prey. Bats flew intricate patterns through the air, catching insects, navigating by sound rather than sight. The lake teemed with invisible life. Fish moving in the depths, water insects crawling through underwater forests of plants, frogs singing their endless chorus, turtles sleeping on the bottom buried in mud. Fionnuala was part of this vast web of life, one thread among countless threads, one creature among countless creatures, one consciousness among the many consciousnesses that shared this place, this time, this existence. She was not more important than any other thread, any other creature, any other consciousness. She was simply herself, occupying her particular niche, playing her particular role, contributing her particular presence to the whole. This understanding brought humility but also confidence, a recognition that while she was not special or chosen or more valuable than anything else, she was also not less valuable, not insignificant, not unimportant. She had her place, her purpose, her reason for being, even if that reason was simply to be, to exist, to experience the world, and add her experience to the collective experience of all living things. The moon reached its highest point in the sky, its zenith, the moment when it looked down most directly on the world below, when its light was strongest, when its influence was most powerful. Fionnuala felt this power, felt the pull of the moon on the water and on her own body, which was mostly water, felt herself responding to forces larger than herself. Forces that moved oceans and directed tides and governed the rhythms of countless lives. She surrendered to these forces, stopped resisting, stopped trying to control or direct or choose, simply allowed herself to be moved by whatever wanted to move her. She became like driftwood on the water, like a leaf on the wind, like a wave in the ocean. Not separate from the forces that moved her, but one with them, an expression of them, a manifestation of their power and their will. In this state of complete surrender, she felt paradoxically more free than she had ever felt when trying to maintain control, more powerful than she had ever felt when trying to direct her own course. Surrender, she understood now, was not weakness, but strength, not defeat, but victory, not loss, but gain. When you stopped fighting the current, you could ride it anywhere. When you stopped resisting the wind, it could lift you higher than your own efforts ever could. She let the water carry her where it would, let the gentle currents move her slowly across the moonlit surface, let herself drift without purpose or destination, trusting completely that wherever she ended up would be exactly where she needed to be. This trust was hard-won, built up over countless nights of practice, of learning to let go, of discovering again and again that the universe was not hostile or indifferent, but fundamentally benevolent, fundamentally supportive, fundamentally on her side. The currents carried her toward the eastern shore, toward a small cove she didn't visit often, sheltered by overhanging rocks where ferns grew in the crevices and moss covered the stones in thick green carpets. The water here was shallow and very still, protected from wind, warmer than the open lake, creating a natural bath that felt almost womb-like in its enclosure and warmth. Fionnuala settled into this warm water with a sigh of contentment, feeling her muscles relax completely, feeling tension she didn't know she carried dissolve and flow away. The water here is not different from the open lake. Greener, earthier, carrying the scent of moss and ferns and the mineral richness of stone. It was like being held in a warm hand, like being embraced by the earth itself, like returning to some primordial state of complete safety and complete peace. She closed her eyes and let herself float in this warm embrace. Let the gentle lap of water against stone become her lullaby. Let the rustle of ferns in the night breeze become her symphony. Let the steady, reliable presence of the earth beneath and around her become her foundation, her anchor, her home. Time ceased to have meaning in this place. She might have floated there for minutes or hours. There was no way to tell, and no need to know. The moon moved across the sky, its light shifting the patterns of shadow and illumination in the cove, painting the rocks and ferns and water in constantly changing combinations of silver and black. Eventually, Fionnuala stirred and opened her eyes, drawn back to wakefulness not by any sound or disturbance, but by some internal clock, some instinct that told her it was time to move on, time to return to the open water, time to continue her nightly journey across the lake. She emerged from the cove slowly, reluctantly, like someone leaving a warm bed on a cold morning, grateful for the comfort, but accepting that it was time to face the world again. The lake stretched before her, vast and silver under the moon, its surface rippled now by a light breeze that had sprung up while she rested in the sheltered cove. The ripples caught the moonlight and transformed it into a million tiny sparks, a million points of dancing light that made the whole lake seem alive, seem conscious, seem to be celebrating something, though she couldn't say what. She glided out into this living water, into this celebration, feeling the coolness of the moving water after the warmth of the cove, feeling more awake now, more alert, more ready to engage with the night and whatever it might bring. The breeze ruffled her feathers, bringing with it new scents from different parts of the lake shore. Pine trees from the northern hills, wild flowers from the meadows to the south, the sharp clean scent of rock from the eastern cliffs. Each scent told a story, painted a picture in her mind of places she couldn't see but could imagine, places that existed beyond her immediate experience but were connected to her through the air they shared, through the water that flowed from those places into the lake, through the invisible threads that linked everything to everything else. She found herself thinking about the lake's sources, the streams and springs that fed it, the rain that fell into it, the underground aquifers that seeped up through the bottom. All this water came from somewhere else, had traveled long distances, had been part of clouds and oceans and rivers before arriving here, before becoming part of this particular body of water that she called home. The lake was not static, but constantly flowing, constantly changing, water coming in and water going out through the outlet stream at the southern end, maintaining itself through this constant circulation, this endless flow. She herself was part of this flow, she realized. The water she drank became part of her body, and the water her body released became part of the lake again. There was no clear boundary between herself and the lake, no definite line where she ended and it began. She was made of lake water, and the lake was partly made of her, and this mutual interpenetration meant they were not separate things, but aspects of one continuous whole. This thought expanded to include everything else. The fish she ate became part of her, and when she eventually died, her body would feed other creatures, would decompose and return to the water, would become food for plants and bacteria and tiny organisms, would be broken down and reconstituted into new forms of life. Nothing was ever lost, nothing was ever wasted. Everything was constantly being recycled, transformed, renewed. Death itself, seen from this perspective, was not an ending but a transformation, not a loss but a change of form, not something to fear but something natural and necessary and even beautiful in its own way. She would die someday. She didn't know when or how, but she knew it would happen, knew it was inevitable, knew it was part of the cycle that governed all living things. And when she died, She would not disappear but would return to the elements that made her, would become water and earth and air again, would be scattered and redistributed and incorporated into new life. This understanding brought peace, took away the fear of death that most creatures carried, that made them anxious and defensive and desperate to survive at any cost. She still wanted to live, still felt the basic animal drive to continue existing, but this drive was softened by acceptance, by the knowledge that death was not an enemy but a friend, not a thief but a transformer, not an end but a transition. She glided through the moonlit water with this peace settling deeper into her bones, becoming part of her, changing how she moved and breathed and existed in the world. She felt lighter somehow, less burdened, as if she had been carrying a heavy weight without knowing it and had finally set it down. The night seemed brighter, the stars more brilliant, the water more welcoming, as if the whole world was responding to her changed state, as if reality itself shifted to match her internal transformation. A family of ducks paddled past, adults with several half-grown ducklings following in a neat line, moving purposefully towards some destination known only to them. The ducklings were still fluffy, not yet fully feathered, vulnerable and endearing in their ungainliness. Fionuala felt a wave of tenderness watching them, remembering dimly her own early days, though she couldn't recall if she had ever been a duckling or a cygnet or something else entirely. The memory was too distant, too blurred, like trying to recall a dream from years ago. But the tenderness remained, directed not just at the ducklings, but at all young vulnerable creatures, at everything new and fragile and learning how to be in the world. She understood now that she too was still learning, still growing, still developing, despite her many years on the lake. There was always more to discover, more to understand, more to experience. Learning never stopped as long as you remained open, remained curious, remained willing to see the world with fresh eyes. The ducks disappeared into the darkness, their soft quacking fading into silence. Fionuala continued her slow gliding, moving now toward the western part of the lake where the water was deepest, where the bottom dropped away into mysterious depths that no light penetrated, where ancient things might live, might sleep, might dream their cold, dark dreams. She had always felt drawn to these deep places, felt curious about what existed down there in the permanent darkness, what creatures adapted to that environment, what strange life forms evolved in the absence of light. She knew there were fish down there, cold water species that rarely came to the surface, that lived their entire lives in the depths, that had never seen the sky or felt the sun's warmth. She wondered what their experience of existence was like, how they perceived the world, whether they were happy or sad or felt anything at all in their cold darkness. But she couldn't go down there to find out. Her lungs were made for air, not water. She could dive, could stay under for a minute or two, could reach depths of perhaps 20 feet, but beyond that the pressure became too great, the need for air too urgent, the darkness too complete. The depths remained mysterious to her, unknown, a realm she could wonder about but never truly enter. She accepted this limitation without frustration. Every creature had its realm, its element, its particular way of being that was suited to some environments and unsuited to others. Hers was the surface, the interface between water and air, the thin boundary where two elements met. She was designed for this place, perfectly adapted to it, and she didn't need to go anywhere else to find fulfillment or meaning or purpose. The deep water was cold even at the surface, fed by springs that came from underground chambers where the sun never reached, where temperature remained constant year-round regardless of the season above. Fionuala felt this coldness rising up from below, felt it against her breast and belly, a chill that was bracing rather than unpleasant, that woke her up, that made her more alert and present. She spent time in this cold water, letting it invigorate her, letting it sharpen her senses, letting it remind her that life was not always comfortable or easy, that challenge and difficulty had their place and their value, that growth often came from discomfort rather than from ease. The cold demanded that she stay active, stay moving, stay engaged. It wouldn't let her drift into complacency or laziness, or the kind of dull half-living that came from too much comfort, too much safety, too much predictability. But eventually the cold became too much, and she moved back toward shallower water, toward the warmth stored in the lake's upper layers, toward the comfortable, familiar places where she spent most of her time. She found a spot that felt just right. Not too deep, not too shallow, not too warm, not too cold, but perfectly balanced, perfectly suited to her needs in this particular moment. She settled into this spot with satisfaction, with the feeling of having found exactly what she was looking for, even though she hadn't been consciously searching. The water held her gently, rocked her softly, created that perfect floating sensation that she had come to love so deeply, that had become for her the very definition of peace, the very embodiment of rest. The moon was descending now, beginning its long fall toward the western horizon, changing angle so that its light came from a different direction, created different shadows, painted the lake in different patterns. Fionnuala watched this slow descent with appreciation, understanding that she was witnessing something ancient and reliable, something that had happened every night since the beginning of time, something that would continue happening long after she was gone. There was comfort in this reliability, in the moon's faithful return night after night, in its predictable phases and paths, in the way it followed laws that were older than life itself, older than the earth, older than anything except the universe itself. The moon didn't choose to rise and set, didn't decide to wax and wane. It simply followed its nature, obeyed the forces that governed it, did what it was made to do without question or complaint or any desire to be anything other than what it was. She could learn from the moon, she thought. Could practice following her own nature as faithfully as the moon followed its orbit, could stop questioning and resisting and trying to be something other than what she was, could simply be herself completely and trust that this was enough, that this was everything, that this was all that was ever required. The breeze picked up slightly, creating larger waves that made her bob up and down more noticeably, that required small adjustments to maintain her position, that engaged her attention in a pleasant way. She liked these gentle challenges, liked having to respond to the water's movements, liked the way it kept her present and aware rather than drifting off into abstraction or drowsiness. A cloud passed across the moon, dimming its light temporarily, creating a moment of deeper darkness. In this darkness, the stars became more visible, more prominent, asserting themselves in the moon's absence. Fionnuala looked up at them, at the vast spray of light across the sky, at the Milky Way cutting its bright path from horizon to horizon, at the familiar constellations she had learned to recognize over countless clear nights. She knew some of the old stories attached to these star patterns, stories about hunters and bears and heroes and monsters, stories that humans had told for thousands of years to make sense of the lights in the sky, to connect them to their own lives and experiences and struggles. These stories felt comforting, even though she knew they were just stories, knew that the stars themselves were suns, like the one that warmed her days, knew that they were impossibly far away, and had nothing to do with the shapes humans saw in their arrangements. But the stories mattered not because they were true in a literal sense, but because they were true in a deeper sense, because they spoke to something fundamental in consciousness, in the need to find meaning and pattern and narrative in the world, in the desire to connect the vast and incomprehensible universe to the small and personal scale of individual experience. The cloud passed and the moonlight returned, dimming the stars again, but painting the lake in renewed silver. Everything was constantly changing, Fionnuala reflected. Light to dark to light again, warm to cold to warm, day to night to day, season to season to season, life to death to life. Change was the only constant, transformation, the only stable state, flow, the only permanence. And yet beneath all this change, something remained unchanged. The lake was always the lake, even as its water flowed away and new water replaced it. She was always herself, even as her cells died and were replaced, even as her body aged and changed, even as her thoughts and feelings and experiences accumulated and transformed her understanding. There was a continuity beneath the change, an identity that persisted, a self that remained, even as everything else shifted and morphed and became something new. This paradox of change and continuity, of transformation and stability, seemed to be at the heart of existence itself. Everything was always flowing, and yet everything remained itself. Nothing stayed the same, and yet nothing truly changed. She was not the same swan who had first arrived at this lake, and yet she was exactly that same swan, unchanged in her essential nature, even as everything about her had transformed. She let these thoughts dissolve like mist dissolving in sunlight, let them go without trying to resolve them or understand them completely. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, some paradoxes weren't meant to be reconciled, some truths could only be experienced rather than understood. Thinking could take you only so far, and beyond that point you had to let go of thought and simply rest in direct experience, in wordless knowing, in the kind of understanding that came through the body rather than through the mind. The night was growing late now, moving toward that darkest hour before dawn, when the world seemed to hold its breath, when everything paused before the daily miracle of sunrise began again. Fionnuala felt this pause, this suspension, this pregnant moment when night reached its fullest expression before beginning its retreat. She found herself thinking about all the creatures sleeping around her. The ducks with heads tucked under wings, the fish resting in the weeds, the frogs silent now in the mud, the turtles buried at the bottom, the birds in their nests on shore, even the trees and plants in their own plant version of sleep. Metabolism slowed, growth paused, waiting for dawn to begin their work again. The whole world was resting, she realized, taking this nightly break, this regular intermission in the constant business of living. Rest was not laziness or weakness, but necessity, not a withdrawal from life, but an essential part of life, as important as activity, as valuable as work, as necessary as food or water or air. She let herself sink deeper into this rest, let her body grow heavier, let her mind grow quieter, let herself merge more completely with the sleeping world around her. Her breathing slowed to match the slow breathing of the earth itself. Her heartbeat synchronized with the ancient pulse that moved through all living things, her consciousness. Expanded to include more and more until there was no clear boundary between herself and everything else, until she was the lake and the night and the moon and the sleeping creatures and the silent trees, until she was everything and nothing, everywhere and nowhere, someone and no one all at once. In this expanded state, time seemed to stop, or rather to become irrelevant, to lose its power to divide experience into past and present and future. There was only this eternal now, this endless moment that contained all moments, this single point that was also infinite space, this stillness that was also perfect movement. How long she remained in this state she couldn't say. It might have been minutes, or hours, or no time at all. But gradually, slowly, gently, she began to contract again, to return to her individual consciousness, to become once more this particular swan floating on this particular lake, rather than everything everywhere all at once. The return was gentle, felt natural and right, felt like coming home after a long journey to a foreign land. She was grateful for the expansion, grateful for the glimpse it had given her of something larger than herself. But she was also grateful to be herself again, to have boundaries and limits and a particular identity, to be this and not that. Here and not there, now and not then. The moon was low now, almost touching the western hills, preparing for its own rest beneath the horizon. Soon it would be gone, and the darkness would deepen briefly before dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. This transition time between moonset and sunrise was the darkest part of night, the time when even night creatures grew quiet, when the world seemed to pause and hold its breath, waiting. Fionnuala positioned herself to watch the moon's final descent, to witness its disappearance, to honor its nightly journey across the sky. As it sank lower and lower, its light changed color, became more golden, more amber, taking on the warm tones of sunset. Even though this was moonset, the moon's own version of that daily transformation. Then it touched the horizon, seemed to balance there for a moment on the edge of the world, then began to sink, to be swallowed by the earth, to disappear degree by degree until only a bright sliver remained, then a glimmer, then nothing. The moon was gone, the night was darker, and the stars blazed with renewed brilliance in the absence of the moon's competing light. In the deeper darkness after the moon's departure, Fionnuala became more aware of sounds that had been present all along, but were somehow more noticeable now, more present, more demanding of attention. The gentle lap of water against the shore seemed louder, more distinct, each small wave creating its own particular sound, its own unique note in the symphony of water and land meeting. The wind in the reeds made music too, a soft rustling that rose and fell with each gust, creating rhythms that were complex and unpredictable, yet somehow felt inevitable, felt exactly right. She heard an owl call from the woods beyond the shore, its haunting question echoing across the dark water. Another owl answered from a different direction, and then silence fell again, broken only by the water sounds, the wind sounds, the small splashes of fish occasionally breaking the surface. These sounds created a soundscape that was rich and layered, that had depth and texture, that filled the darkness with presence rather than emptiness. Floating in this darkness, unable to see more than vague shapes and shadows, Fionnuala relied more heavily on her other senses. Her sense of touch became more acute, more sensitive to the subtle movements of water against her feathers, to the temperature variations in different parts of the lake, to the gentle pressure of the breeze on her face and neck. Her sense of smell sharpened, picking up scents that she might have missed in the brightness of moonlight. The green smell of algae growing on submerged stones, the earthy smell of mud in the shallows, the faint perfume of night-blooming flowers on the shore. Even her sense of taste seemed enhanced, the water having a distinct flavor when she dipped her bill in to drink, mineral and fresh and slightly sweet, carrying the taste of the rocks it had flowed over, the soil it had filtered through, the plants that grew in it. Every sense brought information, painted a picture, helped her understand and navigate her environment even without the aid of vision. She realized that she had been relying too heavily on sight, that vision had become her dominant sense, and she had neglected the others, had stopped paying full attention to what they told her. But here in the darkness, forced to perceive the world differently, she discovered how much information the other senses provided, how rich and complete a picture they painted when given the chance, when attended to fully. This discovery felt like a gift, like being given new eyes even as her physical eyes saw nothing but darkness. She could see with her skin, see with her ears, see with her nose and tongue, and the subtle sense of balance that told her which way was up, that helped her maintain her position on the water, even when she couldn't see where the water was, even when visual references disappeared and she had to trust her body's knowing, her instinctive understanding of how to float, how to be. The darkness became not an absence, but a presence. Not something missing, but something there. Not emptiness, but fullness of a different kind. It was full of sound and scent and sensation, full of information and richness and depth. It was alive in its own way, conscious in its own way, generous in its own way, with those who learned to perceive it properly, who learned to receive what it offered rather than mourning what it withheld. Fionuala found herself grateful for this darkness, grateful for the way it stripped away the visual world and revealed a deeper world underneath, grateful for the way it forced her to slow down and pay attention and use senses she had been neglecting. She understood now why so many spiritual traditions spoke of darkness as a teacher, as a purifier, as a way of seeing more clearly by seeing differently, by looking with inner eyes rather than outer ones. She floated in this teaching darkness, this revelatory darkness, letting it work on her, letting it change her, letting it show her things she had never seen before, even though they had always been there, waiting to be noticed. The lake breathed around her, in her, through her. The night held her like a mother holds a child, secure and safe and infinitely patient. The darkness itself seemed to caress her, seemed to touch her with invisible fingers, seemed to love her in a way that needed no light to express itself, that existed beyond sight, beyond image, beyond anything that eyes could perceive. Time passed in this darkness, though she had no way to measure it, no way to mark its passage, except by the gradual shift in the quality of the darkness itself, the way it began almost imperceptibly to thin, to lighten, to prepare for the coming dawn. This shift was so subtle at first that she wasn't sure it was real, wondered if she was imagining it, if her eyes were simply adjusting further to the darkness and creating the illusion of light where none yet existed. But gradually, definitely, the darkness did begin to retreat. The eastern sky, which had been uniformly black, began to show the faintest hint of gray, just a barely perceptible lightening along the horizon where sky met land. This gray spread slowly upward, climbing the sky degree by degree, so slowly that watching it felt like watching a tree grow or a mountain erode, felt like witnessing something that happened on a timescale too vast for individual perception. Yet it was happening, undeniably and inevitably, the same miracle that happened every morning, the same daily resurrection of light from darkness, the same proof that nothing ends forever, that every death is followed by rebirth, that every night yields to dawn no matter how dark it has been. No matter how long it has lasted, no matter how permanent it might have seemed. Fionuala watched this slow lightening with reverence, with awe, with the feeling you have when witnessing something sacred, something that touches the mystery at the heart of existence, something that speaks to truths too deep for words. She had seen countless dawns, had watched this transformation happen again and again, and yet it never lost its power to move her, never became routine or ordinary or just another sunrise to add to the collection. Each dawn was unique, was unrepeatable, was a gift given once and never exactly the same way again. Each morning the light returned in a slightly different way, painted the sky in slightly different colors, revealed the world in slightly different light, and each morning she was slightly different too, had changed overnight in ways both visible and invisible, was not quite the same swan who had watched yesterday's dawn, who would watch tomorrow's dawn. The gray in the eastern sky gradually took on color, the faintest hint of pink at first, so pale it was almost white, almost colorless, just a suggestion of warmth in the gray. This pink deepened slowly, became rose, became coral, became the delicate peachy color of certain shells, of skin warmed by sun, of light filtered through petals. The color spread across the horizon like paint spilled in mortar, diffusing and expanding and transforming everything it touched. Above this band of color, the sky remained darker, still holding night's blue, black depth, still showing stars, though they were fading now, becoming less distinct, preparing to disappear into the growing light. Fionnuala could see the brightest stars still, the ones that held out longest against the dawn. Sirius, Arcturus, Vega, Jupiter, brilliant and steady near the horizon. These stars seemed to pulse in the growing light, seemed to fight against their inevitable erasure, seemed reluctant to surrender their nightly dominion over the sky. But surrender they must, and surrender they did, one by one, fading and disappearing as the light grew stronger, as the sun's approach became more certain, as dawn claimed more and more territory from the night. The eastern sky brightened, from peachy pink to gold, from gold to amber, from amber to a yellow so bright and pure it seemed to have substance, seemed to be made of light itself rather than just illuminated by it. The water began to reflect these colors, transforming from black to deep blue to lighter blue to green, to the same golden color as the sky. The whole world was changing, was being remade, was undergoing its daily transformation from the realm of night to the realm of day. Everything that had been hidden was being revealed, everything dark was becoming visible, everything mysterious was becoming known. Fionnuala felt herself changing too, felt her night consciousness giving way to day. Consciousness, felt herself becoming more alert, more active, more engaged with the physical world. Her eyes, which had grown accustomed to darkness, now had to adjust to light, had to learn again how to see shapes and colors and distances, had to remember how to navigate by vision rather than by other senses. The birds began their morning chorus, tentative at first. A single robin singing from a willow branch, then a blackbird joining from somewhere in the reeds, then more and more birds adding their voices until the air was full of song, full of celebration, full of the joy that greeted each new day. Each species had its own particular call, its own melody, its own way of announcing that it had survived the night, that it was still alive, that it was ready to face another day of living. Fionnuala added her own voice to this chorus, making the soft trumpeting call that was a swan's greeting to the morning, a declaration of presence, a statement of existence. The sound carried across the water, echoed back from the far shore, was answered by her brothers, somewhere on the lake, by other swans scattered across the surface, all of them calling out their location, their vitality, their connection to each other and to the day that was being born. The sun's upper edge appeared at the horizon, a brilliant point of light so bright it hurt to look at directly, so intense it seemed to burn through the atmosphere, to create its own hole in the fabric of sky. This first glimpse of sun sent shafts of light radiating outward, piercing through clouds on the horizon, creating the effect that artists called God rays or Jacob's ladder, beams of light that looked solid enough to climb, that seemed to connect earth to heaven, that made visible the invisible, made tangible the intangible. Fionnuala felt this light touch her like a blessing, like a hand laid gently on her head, like a voice speaking her name. She felt warmed by it even though the actual heat was still minimal, even though the air remained cool from night. The warmth was spiritual more than physical, was the warmth of recognition, of being seen, of being welcomed back into the world of light after her sojourn in darkness. The sun continued its rise, revealing more and more of itself, climbing above the horizon in steady, incremental progress. As it rose, the quality of light changed from the soft gold of sunrise to the clearer, whiter light of morning, to the light that allowed true colors to be seen, that showed things as they were, rather than as they appeared in the colored glow of dawn. The lake was revealed in all its morning beauty, the far shore with its line of willows now clearly visible, the reeds standing in their masses along the edges, the water plants visible beneath the surface in the shallows, fish jumping occasionally to catch the morning hatch of insects, other waterfowl going about their morning business of preening and feeding and socializing. Everything looked fresh and new, washed clean by the night, ready to begin again. The world felt young, felt full of possibility, felt like anything might happen. Like this day might bring adventures or discoveries or experiences unlike anything that had come before. Even though Fionuala knew that the day would probably unfold much like countless other days had unfolded, still she felt this sense of potential, this morning optimism that made everything seem possible. She began to move across the water, shaking off the last remnants of night's stillness, engaging her muscles, creating movement and momentum. The water was smooth as silk, barely rippled by the light morning breeze, and gliding across it felt effortless, felt like floating on air, felt like being suspended in some medium between water and sky that offered no resistance, that welcomed her passage, that seemed designed specifically for her movement. Other swans were doing the same, all of them moving now after the night's rest, all of them beginning the day's activities of feeding and preening and territorial displays. She saw her brothers in the distance, 3 white forms moving in, loose association with each other, comfortable in their companionship, secure in their family bonds. She felt a wave of affection for them, for their shared history, for the way they had survived together, adapted together, learned together how to live in these forms that had been forced upon them, but which they had made their own. She thought about approaching them, joining them for the morning feeding, but something held her back, some desire to remain solitary for a while longer, to extend this contemplative state she had been in all night, to stay in that space of deep peace and connection before engaging with the social demands of swan life. They would understand, she knew. They had learned to respect each other's need for solitude as well as for companionship, had found a balance between togetherness and independence that worked for all of them. So she continued alone, gliding through the morning light, following her own path, attending to her own needs and desires without reference to anyone else. The freedom of this solitude felt precious, felt like a gift she gave herself, permission to be completely herself without having to negotiate or compromise or consider anyone else's preferences or expectations. She found a patch of water plants growing in a shallow area where the bottom was visible through the clear water, where sunlight penetrated all the way down and created a golden glow that made everything look magical, dreamlike, as if this were not an ordinary lake, but some enchanted place where normal rules didn't apply. The plants swayed gently in the current, their long stems dancing, their leaves undulating in rhythms that were hypnotic, that drew the eye and held it, that created a kind of visual music. Fionuala lowered her head and began to graze on these plants, pulling them up from the bottom, tasting their green freshness, their mineral flavor, their stored sunlight and earth. Eating was a meditation, she had learned, a way of being present, of paying attention, of honoring the food and the body that would transform it into energy and life. She ate slowly, mindfully, grateful for each mouthful, grateful for the abundance that surrounded her, grateful for the simple fact that she was here, alive, able to eat and be nourished. Small fish darted around her as she fed, taking advantage of her disturbance of the bottom to catch tiny organisms that she stirred up, following her like attendants, like companions, like collaborators in the work of living. She didn't mind their presence, didn't feel intruded upon, felt instead a sense of connection, of being part of this community of creatures, all engaged in the same basic activities of eating and surviving and living another day. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, warming the water, warming her back and wings as she fed. The warmth felt good, felt healing, felt like it was penetrating, not just her feathers and skin, but deeper, warming her bones, her organs, her very soul. She turned occasionally to present different parts of her body to the sun, to let it touch her everywhere, to let its heat and light reach every part of her, missing nothing, leaving no corner cold or dark or untouched. When she had eaten enough, when her belly was pleasantly full, she moved to slightly deeper water and began to preen, running her bill carefully through each feather, checking for damage, removing dirt or parasites, redistributing the waterproofing oil that kept her dry, that allowed her to float on water without becoming waterlogged, that was. Essential to her survival as a water bird. This grooming was both practical and pleasurable, both necessary maintenance and sensual enjoyment, both work and play combined in one activity. She preened for a long time, thorough and methodical, making sure every feather was in perfect condition, every part of her plumage properly cared for. This attention to detail was not vanity, but survival, was not superficial, but essential, was the difference between health and illness, between thriving and merely existing. Her feathers were her protection against cold and wet, her insulation, her waterproofing, her very survival gear. And they deserved this careful attention, this loving maintenance, this daily ritual of care. As she preened, she found herself thinking about care itself, about how important it was, how necessary, how often overlooked or dismissed as unimportant. Caring for her feathers was caring for herself, was an act of self-love, was a way of saying to herself and to the world that she mattered, that her well-being was important, that she deserved to be tended to with attention and gentleness and patience. And if she deserved this care, then so did everything else. Every creature deserved care, deserved attention, deserved to be tended to and maintained and loved. The lake deserved care, the air deserved care, the earth itself deserved care. Everything was interconnected, everything affected everything else, and care given anywhere rippled outward, created patterns that spread, that influenced, that made the whole world a little better, a little more loved, a little more tended. She finished preening and shook herself, sending droplets flying in all directions, each one catching the sunlight, each one becoming for a moment a tiny prism, a fragment of rainbow. Then she settled back into floating position, perfectly still, perfectly relaxed, letting the sun continue its work of warming and healing and blessing her with its light. The day progressed in its usual pattern. The sun climbed to its zenith, heat intensified, shadows shortened and then began to lengthen again as the sun started its descent toward evening. Fionnuala moved between sun and shade, between activity and rest, between engagement and withdrawal, following her body's needs and desires, listening to its wisdom, trusting its knowing. She spent time with other swans in the afternoon, floating together in a loose group, occasionally making soft contact calls, occasionally touching bills in. Greeting or affection, mostly just being together in comfortable silence, in companionship that didn't require words or constant interaction, that was content simply to share space and time and the experience of being alive. Her brothers were part of this group, and she felt their presence like a steady background warmth, like coals in a fireplace, like stones heated by sun and slowly releasing that heat through cool evening. They had been together so long now that they communicated in subtle ways, a glance, a posture, a particular quality of silence that said more than words ever could. They knew each other completely, knew each other's rhythms and preferences and moods, could sense without asking when one of them needed company or solitude, support or space. This deep knowing felt precious, felt like treasure accumulated slowly over years of shared experience, felt like wealth that couldn't be measured or spent or lost, only appreciated and enjoyed and held with gratitude. They had been given this gift of time together, this long companionship, this opportunity to know and be known so completely. Not every creature received such a gift. Not everyone had family who stayed close. who remained connected despite transformations and challenges and the inevitable changes that time brought. As evening approached, the light began to take on that golden quality that Fionnuala loved so much, that made everything beautiful, that transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. The lake became liquid gold, the hills became sculpted bronze, the sky became a canvas for light to paint its daily masterpiece of color and radiance and transcendent beauty. She moved away from the group, seeking solitude again as night approached, wanting to meet the darkness alone, to greet it privately, to make this transition in her own way and her own time. She glided slowly toward her favorite spot, the place where she had floated so many nights, the place that felt like home within home, like the very center of her world, like the point from which everything else radiated outward. The sun touched the western horizon, balanced there for a moment like the moon had balanced the night before. Then began its descent, its disappearance, its daily death, that would be followed by nightly resurrection. The colors intensified as it sank, gold to orange to red to purple to deep violet that verged on black. The whole sky became a symphony of color, a celebration of light, even as light prepared to depart. A final, glorious display before darkness claimed dominion once again. Fionnuala watched the sunset with full attention, with complete presence, not wanting to miss a single moment, not wanting to let distraction or internal chatter steal this experience from her. This was one of the great gifts of living. These moments of transcendent beauty. These times when the world revealed its deepest nature, when ordinary reality became luminous with meaning and significance, and the sheer, improbable wonder of existence itself. The sun disappeared, and twilight settled over the lake like a soft blanket, like a gentle hand, like a blessing whispered in a language older than words. The first stars appeared, tentative at first, then growing bolder as darkness deepened. The air cooled and grew still, creating that perfect evening quiet when even the wind seemed to hold its breath, when sound carried for miles, when the world seemed to pause and reflect on the day that was ending. Fionnuala felt herself settling deeper into rest, into the quiet place inside herself where peace lived, where stillness dwelled, where she was most truly herself, beyond all roles and identities and histories. She was not a swan or a sister or a creature of the lake. She was simply consciousness experiencing itself, simply awareness being aware, simply existence, existing in this one eternal moment that was all there ever was or would be. The moon rose, not quite full now, but still generous with its light, still bright enough to paint the world in silver and shadow, still faithful in its nightly return. Fionnuala greeted it like an old friend, like a companion who had been with her through countless nights, who had witnessed her transformation and growth, who had watched over her. With patient benevolence, asking nothing, giving everything, she positioned herself in the moonlight, letting it fall on her like rain, like light made tangible, like love made visible. Her feathers glowed silver white, luminous against the dark water, and she felt herself becoming light, becoming moonlight, becoming something more than physical, more than merely material, something that partook of both earthly and celestial nature, both water and air, both mortal and eternal. The night deepened around her. Stars multiplied until the sky was dense with them, thick with their ancient light, heavy with the weight of so much distance, so much time, so much space compressed into points of brightness that burned with cold fire. She floated beneath this vastness, held by water, embraced by darkness, blessed by starlight, and felt herself part of it all, connected to it all, inseparable from it all. Her breathing slowed naturally, inevitably, following its own rhythm, its own wisdom, its own path toward rest. Each breath grew longer, deeper, more complete, carrying her down into quieter and quieter states, into deeper and deeper levels of peace. Her heart beat slow too, steady and strong, but unhurried, patient, content, to beat as many times as necessary, and no more, trusting that it knew what it was doing, trusting that it would continue as long as it needed to, and then stop when its work was done. Her body grew heavy in the water, grew warm despite the cool night air, grew soft and yielding and completely relaxed. Every muscle released its tension, every joint loosened, every fiber of her being let go of effort and simply rested, simply existed, simply floated on water that held her without question or hesitation, or any demand that she be anything other than exactly what she was. Her mind grew quiet too, thoughts becoming fewer, spaces between thoughts becoming longer, until there was more silence than thinking, more emptiness than content, more peace than activity. This mental stillness felt like a homecoming, like arriving at a destination she had been seeking without knowing it, like finding something she had lost long ago and forgotten she was missing. In this stillness, time stopped meaning anything. There was no past to remember, no future to plan for, no present to grasp or hold on to. There was only this floating, this breathing, this being, this moment that was all moments, this place that was all places, this experience that contained all experience within its boundless simplicity. The moon crossed the sky in its ancient path. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The lake breathed and sighed and held her in its liquid embrace. And Fionnuala rested, completely and utterly at rest, safe and warm and whole, held by waters that would never let her fall, watched over by a universe that loved her simply because she existed, simply because she was part of it, simply because there was no separation between her and anything else, no boundary where she ended and the world began. She had found what she had been seeking all along, not happiness or pleasure or fulfillment in any conventional sense, but simply this, peace. The deep, unshakable peace that came from accepting what was, from surrendering to what is, from trusting that everything was exactly as it needed to be, that nothing was wrong, that even the difficult and painful parts of life had their place and their purpose and their gift, to give if you could receive it with open hands and open heart. This peace was not dependent on circumstances, not contingent on anything external, not something that could be given or taken away by anyone or anything else. It was her birthright, her natural state, her true nature that had been there all along beneath the surface of her thoughts and feelings and experiences, waiting patiently to be discovered, waiting silently to be recognized, waiting lovingly to welcome her home. And now she was home. Not in any geographical sense, not in any physical location, but in the deepest sense possible. Home in herself, home in this moment, home in existence itself. The long journey of transformation had brought her here, to this floating peace, to this quiet knowing, to this complete acceptance of what was and what is and what will be. The lake held her through the deep hours of night, through the darkest times when moon and stars were hidden by clouds, through the cold times when frost formed on the shore and mist rose from the water, through all the changes and challenges that night brought. It held her faithfully, patiently, asking nothing, giving everything, being exactly what she needed it to be. Solid beneath her, liquid around her, constant despite all change, reliable despite all uncertainty. And as dawn approached again, as the cycle completed itself and prepared to begin anew, Fionnuala remained in her state of deep rest, of profound peace, of complete surrender to what is. She was ready for whatever came next, another day, another night, another season, another year, another lifetime. Whatever came, she would meet it with this peace, with this acceptance, with this deep knowing that all was well, that all had always been well, that all would always be well, no matter what forms the changes took, no matter what transformations lay ahead. The first birds began their pre-dawn songs, soft and tentative in the darkness, greeting the coming light before it arrived, preparing the world for another beginning, another chance, another gift of time and life and consciousness. Fionuala heard these songs as if from a great distance, heard them through layers of peace and rest and deep relaxation, heard them as part of the dream she was dreaming, the dream that was also reality, the dream that was life itself unfolding moment by moment in its mysterious and beautiful way. And in this perfect peace, floating on water that held her like love itself, embraced by darkness that was preparing to give birth to light, surrounded by the breathing presence of all living things, Fionnuala continued to rest, continued to float, continued to simply be, needing nothing, seeking nothing, complete in this one eternal moment that would last forever and end immediately and somehow be both at once. The lake whispers ancient lullabies that only water knows, songs that have been singing since the first rains fell, since the first lakes formed, since the first creatures learned to float on surfaces that held them without question. These songs flow through you now, gentle and irresistible, carrying you deeper into rest, into sleep, into the boundless peace that waits beneath all waking, beneath all thought, beneath all the busy surface of consciousness. Your body knows these songs, recognizes them, responds to them by releasing, by softening, by letting go of everything that keeps you separate from the water's embrace, from the night's blessing, from the deep rest that is your birthright and your natural state. Every muscle loosens, every breath deepens, every heartbeat slows until you are not separate from the lake, not different from the sleeping swan, not apart from the peaceful darkness that cradles everything. You are floating now, truly floating, held by something vast and kind, something that has always been there, something that will never abandon you. This holding requires nothing from you except permission to be held, willingness to surrender, acceptance that you don't have to carry yourself anymore, that the water, the universe itself, will do that work for you, gladly, eternally, without ever growing tired or impatient or anything less than completely committed to your safety and your rest. The moonlight that touched Fionnuala touches you now, soft silver light that washes over you like water, like love, like the most gentle caress imaginable. This light carries healing, carries peace, carries the deep knowing that everything is well, that everything has always been well, that beneath all the surface, chaos and confusion and worry, there is only this quiet, this stillness, this perfect peace that needs nothing and lacks nothing, and simply is. Let yourself sink deeper now, deeper than before, deeper than you knew you could go. Let the water take more of your weight, more of your burden, more of everything you've been carrying. Let the darkness become more complete, more total, until there is nothing left but this floating, this surrendering, this complete and utter rest that asks nothing and gives everything and simply holds you, like the most loving parent holds a sleeping child. Your breathing is so slow now, so shallow, barely there at all, just the slightest movement of air, the tiniest rise and fall, almost nothing, almost already the breathing of deep sleep, of complete rest, of consciousness released from the necessity of remaining conscious. Your heartbeat matches this rhythm, slow and steady, patient and sure, beating without effort, without thought, without any need for you to help or to monitor or to do anything at all. Time has stopped completely now. There is no past to remember, no future to anticipate, no present to grasp or hold. There is only this eternal now, this moment outside time, this space outside space, where you exist as pure awareness, as consciousness without content, as being without doing, as rest without end. The lake holds everything, holds Fionnuala, holds you, holds all sleeping creatures, holds all dreams and all rest and all peace. It has been holding since the beginning of time, will continue holding until time ends, and even then will hold, because the lake is eternal, is beyond time, is the very essence of rest itself, made liquid and tangible and real. You are one with this lake now, one with this holding, one with this peace. There is no boundary between you and the water, between you and the sleeping swan, between you and the peaceful night. You are all of it and none of it, everything and nothing, here and everywhere, now and always. Sleep comes without trying now, comes without seeking, comes without any effort whatsoever. It simply arrives like dawn arrives, like breath arrives, like life arrives, inevitable, natural, perfect. You don't fall into sleep, but rather rise into it, float up into it, are lifted into it by the water that has been holding you all along, that has been preparing you for this moment, that has been guiding you toward this perfect rest. Nothing to do now, nothing to think. Nothing to be except what you already are. Let the water carry you. Let the darkness embrace you. Let sleep take you gently into its arms and carry you away to the place where all rest lives, where all peace dwells, where you can finally, completely, utterly let go. The lake will hold you through the night. The moon will watch over you. The stars will keep their vigil. And you will rest, truly rest, deeply rest, rest beyond all need for rest, rest that heals everything, rest that restores everything, rest that makes everything new again. Sleep comes on its own.